Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission meeting for October 11th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, could you do tonight's roll call?
Commissioner Narita? Here. Chair Lewinsky?
Here.
Commissioner Riddlemeyer?
Here.
And Commissioner Robbins and Commissioner Michael are both absent and excused.
Sure. You're going to, if you could speak into a little bit louder so everybody can hear. Great, thank you. Okay. All right, everyone. I just want to let everyone know that there are two ways for the public to participate in tonight's meeting. That is in person and virtually. For those who are attending in person and would like to speak to the commission, please complete a yellow request slip found as you enter the chamber and complete it and hand it to our clerk. If you would like to participate virtually, there are two ways. One is through video and the other is through phone. If through video, click on the Zoom link found at the top of tonight's agenda. Use the Raise Your Hand feature and you will be called on at the appropriate time. When called upon, please let us know who you are and provide your comments to the commission as well as the public. Another virtual participation method is by phone, and that is by calling 408-638-0968. Once again, 408-638-0968. And enter conference ID number 81 21 14 13 98 and the number 6. Once again, 81 21 14, 13, 98, the number 6, followed by entering a passcode 435439, 435439, and then press the hash or pound key. Press star 9 to raise your hand when you would like to be called upon, and star 6 to unmute. And as again, please introduce yourself and provide your comments to the commission as well as the public. Speaking time is 3 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when your 3 minutes have expired. And we do welcome speakers providing public comment, but please be advised, this is a limited public forum. As such, speakers must stay on topic, that is, speak to the agenda item under discussion, and if speaking during the general public comment period, speakers must address matters within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City of San Mateo. If speakers fail to follow these rules, they will be warned by me, and if they continue to disregard the rules, their opportunity to speak will be ended. Public comment for each agenda item will remain available until all public comments on that specific agenda item have been heard by the commission. At that point, I will close public comment for that specific agenda item. The next item on our agenda is the consent calendar. There is one item, that is to approve the regular commission meeting minutes of September 13th. Do I have a motion?
I have a comment on those minutes.
Please, Commissioner Brown.
There is I believe it's a typo under new business, item 3, where the final paragraph, commissioner comments included. The word at the beginning of the third line is liability. I believe that should be reliability. And with that correction, I make a motion to approve.
Seconded.
Okay. I also approve with that correction. Okay, thank you. The next item on tonight's meeting agenda is public comment, is the public comment section. And this section is for persons wishing to comment on an item not appearing on tonight's agenda. State law prevents the commission from acting on any matter not on the agenda. However, comments, once again, that are within the jurisdiction of the City of San Mateo are welcomed and will be considered for future commission meetings. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers in person?
No.
Virtually?
No one.
Okay. All righty. Seeing no speakers' hands raised, we will conclude the public comment section of tonight's meeting and move to a public hearing to consider an appeal from residents related to a city-approved small cell permit in their neighborhood. Are the residents present? Okay, great, thank you. And you do plan to make a presentation tonight? Okay, thank you. Okay, so regarding how we will move forward with this appeal, like we have done other appeals, we will have a presentation by staff, and specifically Jason Hellar, who is a senior manager for the City of San Mateo. We'll return the meeting back to the commissioners for any questions for Jason. And then we will then have Ms. Komatsu, okay. Will you be speaking? Yes. Okay, so we'll have Ms. Komatsu come up and present to the commission. You will have 15 minutes. Okay, so you have time, feel relaxed. And once we finish with your presentation, we'll open it up for public comment, once again, whether in person or virtually. And followed public comment, we'll return back to the commission for final comments, and then at that point, once final comments are in, the commissions will make a motion, and that motion is really, does the commission vote to support the appeal being heard tonight? So, Jason?
Thank you. I will set it up. All right. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. My name is Jason Hilary, the Senior Engineer in Public Works, and I will present to you the wireless permit appeal for the location at 2317 Armada Way. Our agenda for this presentation is I'll go over the wireless permit process, and I'll discuss the permit review process, what we can not regulate, the appeal process. Then I'll give you background on both the permit and the appeal. I will present our staff recommendation and then decision and following and next steps. Here is our permitting process overview. Essentially, it starts with the application review, shown here in blue on the left. They submit. Notices are sent to nearby residents, staff reviews, and then if the application is deemed complete at that time, then it moves on to the approval process, where it becomes a conditional approval. A notice of decision is posted on the city's website, and an alert is sent out via our email list. Then the 5-day appeal process opens, and any time an appeal is received, that's what leads to this public hearing. And then either if no appeals are received, or if the appeal is denied, it moves to the official approval of the wireless permit. That being said, there actually is a shot clock required by the FCC to issue permits within these windows, 60 days for an existing structure and 90 days for a new structure. So the appeal process, for our Muni Code, appeals must be submitted within 5 days of the notice of decision. Appeals must be based on these 3 aspects here, which are site location, pole selection, design criteria, and the appellant has the burden of proof to provide grounds on reversing the approval. Note that federal regulations do not allow the city to regulate based on RF emissions, which are compliant with the FCC regs. And furthermore, the city cannot control a provider's coverage or capacity, nor approve removal of trees to facilitate a new utility. Sorry. So here's our subject permit. It is at, again, 2317 Armada Way, located within the median. It was originally submitted back in May, and the notices went out in May, and then again in July. It was conditionally approved in September 6th, and we received an appeal at that time. Here is a simulation of what is proposed at this pole. There's 2 photos. Again, it's a 2-headed street light in the center median. All right, so our appeals. We received 2 appeals for this permit. The first appeal is essentially based on neighborhood aesthetics and suggested the use of an alternative pole, which was alternate pole number 12. And then our second appellant suggested selecting an alternate site based on concerns over their property value. The permittee's response to these was that our alternative pole number 12 was located significantly closer to a single-family home, which would be more obtrusive, and then the other 2 responses are related to how the city cannot regulate the use of the right-of-way or prohibit it, the use of it by wireless providers, and that small cell installations do not decrease property values. Here's our staff recommendation. So during the review process, staff had confirmed that the wireless permit had satisfied the city's Muni Code and complied with the FCC regulations, which led to this approval decision. Staff also reviewed the appeals and responses and confirms that alternate pole number 12 was considerably closer to a residential structure, and staff also confirms that property values are not a consideration during the review process. Property values are speculative in nature and would be impractical for staff to assess as well. And with that, staff recommends that the appeal be denied and the permit approval be upheld. The next step is for the commission to make to review the appeal and issue the decision tonight. The decision would be final, and if the appeal is denied, then the wireless permit can continue and essentially be approved. And if the appeal is upheld, then the permit would be converted to denied. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Questions? Please.
Great, thanks. And thank you, Jason, and City Attorney's Office for answering some questions offline too. I really appreciate it. So just to be super clear, is the subject of property values preempted under some piece of federal or state law as a consideration for this commission to base a decision on an appeal of a permit?
If I may, Vice Chair.
Oh, hi, you're in person.
Ling Nguyen, Assistant City Attorney.
Thank you for coming in person.
Sure, I'm here on behalf of the Public Works Department, if I may answer that. To my knowledge, property values are not mentioned in any sort of telecom law. It's not preempted. The practical concern, though, is it's not mentioned in the city's ordinance, nor is it in the design standards.
That's correct.
So it's not a criteria. And as you're aware, the staff reviews each permit based on this set of criteria. The provider, in this case Crown Castle, submits their application based on that criteria. So if the commission considers property values at this moment, it's introducing a new criteria, and that's not supported by the design standards or the ordinance. And there's an unfairness factor as well to both staff that reviews it and the provider who actually submits based on what that set criteria is.
That I completely understand that argument. And my follow-up question, though, is like, then what about the residents who do the appeal? I understand the unfairness argument on the side of the applicant, but the same could be said on the side of the residents. And so without that clarity in the law, in any of the laws, and not just property value, but theoretically there is an opening for residents to theoretically argue, and we will continue to hear these cases and take up staff time and commission time doing so in the presence of that silence across all of the different laws, correct? Because this is not, it's not just property value theoretically, it could be any other argument that is within that blank space could continue to come to the commission.
That's correct, Vice Chair. And there exists in our ordinance too the right to appeal. It is very broad. The only thing that's not considered an appeal are when the appeal is based on RF emissions. So residents can appeal for any reason, including property values or anything else they wish. And I think when this ordinance was drafted, it was intended to be broad for residents to be able to voice those concerns.
Okay, so the intention historically in the legislative history, it was intended to be broader so that we can actually hear the concerns of the residents that are broader than what's articulated in the law, but yet staff's and the city attorney's recommendation is actually not to base decisions upon those concerns?
Right, so I think that there's a difference here. So the residents may voice their concerns in an appeal, but at the same time, the review of staff and the review of this commission has to be based on the scope of the law as well, and there is a difference there.
But the appeal, the standard for the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission as an adjudicating body is just says burden of proof. And so my follow-up question is, what is the exact standard of burden of proof that we, as the commissioners who are adjudicating something, should be using? Is it preponderance of the evidence?
It is preponderance of the evidence.
Because that is only a 50% likelihood that what the appeal is, the appellant is stating is true. And so if the adjudicating body, us, think that it is 50.1% likely, let's say, that something is true, then we are obligated to say yes, even if the criteria is beyond the scope of the laws, right? Because this is a concern I have in terms of the gap in the laws right now and the silence of them. Lynn, am I being, tell me.
Respectfully, I disagree. I think the review is within the scope of the law. So if there's a design criteria and there's a city ordinance that articulates how these permits are reviewed and what should be included in them, the commission's role is to make sure that that's followed.
I see. So the silence, you're interpreting so is it accurate to say that you're interpreting the silence in the law to actually be, you are not allowed to, like the city is not allowed and the commission is not, therefore, and by proxy, the commission is not allowed to hear anything beyond aesthetics, essentially?
That's correct. Well, the commission can hear whatever an appellant appeals based on, but the commission's decision has to be based on the criteria, which in this case is the ordinance and the design standards.
So I'm still, how can that be true though? Because there's like such a gap. Would it not be better if the council hopefully soon, change the law to actually just articulate that more clearly? Because then it would not waste residents' time in that way as well, correct? Like,
I can't comment on the policy. I can comment on what the law is as, and what the role of staff is and what they review.
yeah, I completely understand this. Like, I completely understand. I think Jason's doing a great job. For the record, Jason. It's just, this is like an alarming gap that I'm like seeing, and I'm just trying to understand it. So, city attorney's position is the commission can hear anything that is from a resident, but the decision of the commission is based solely upon two things: the application and the design standards.
That's my understanding with one correction.
Okay.
The commission cannot hear appeals based on RF emissions.
Correct.
That are
Okay.
compliant.
And yeah, that is clearly articulated in the FCC, that cities are completely preempted from doing that. That's in the FCC ruling.
That's my
Correct?
understanding.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Sure. Actually, I'd like to just jump in here since I had history with writing the original ordinance. And when we wrote it, we were not, our intent was to focus in on the design standards and the application. We simply felt at that point in time that it could be practically, one, we couldn't anticipate what the issues were. And even if we could, there could be myriads of issues that just keep coming in. So our point was to just focus in on design standards and applications, and as you mentioned correctly, so remain, I guess everything else is silent. Yeah. Okay. And we did that from a practical perspective. But I think it's a really good point you bring up, since I was part of that process and we did have discussions about this. But thank you. Okay. Commissioner Rotmeyer, questions?
Can you explain what the aesthetics criteria exactly are?
Yes. Yeah, essentially, it starts with, we have preferred zones, but there are none that are completely ruled out. We have a preference of the zoning. So it starts with like industrial areas and ends up in residential. And then there's pole selection, which essentially is which is the least obtrusive. It starts off as which is the least obtrusive. And then it comes into other criteria such as shrouding, and it boils down all to aesthetics for all of our criteria. Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about design criteria or aesthetics, are you talking about the site location, the pole?
Yes, the pole location
The pole selection
is one of the,
and the design.
and the design, that's correct.
Okay, so all of that's encompassing,
Yes.
or aesthetics is encompassing all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have no questions. I'll wait for the presentation. But I will share with everyone, I did visit the site today and did take a look. So I might have some questions after your presentation. So if no one else has any further, commissioners, I'm going to let Ms. Komatsu please come up to present. And you will have 15 minutes. Is there a timer to help? We'll get you a timer. Yes, please. Yep. And can you see the timer behind me? Okay, great. And use that as your guide.
Thank you. My presentation will be quite short. And members of the commission, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this with you. I appreciate your patience and your expertise, and also being here rather late in the evening. I live on Armada Way. My name is Mary Komatsu. And I have a picture here, and you can see it, of the pole in question. And what we have here is the median strip of the entrance to our community, which comprises about 234 homes, over 500 residents. There's only one way in and one way out of this community, and you are looking at it. So it is the obligatory situation that as each resident drives in, they will be confronted with this pole in the median on first view. This is now the presentation of our community. And I feel that, because of that, it is rather intrusive, perhaps more so than on first glance, as you can see, that this is square. Every single resident will drive into the community, and this is what they will see, as will anybody else. And by the way, my presentation tonight is not about home values, though I found your discussion captivating. It was really interesting. I'm very impressed. But it isn't. It's based on what we see as we live here. Now, if someone could flip it to the next slide. Yes. Now, this is the reverse. So when we're driving out of the community, each and every resident is obliged to use the median. In this case, you can see we'll be on the right side. And you can see right in the center of that, we are seeing that pole right with us. So as we exit, it is also there for us at all times. So whether we come in or out, there it is. And I feel that is rather intrusive. That most of your site selections have been in side streets, I beg your pardon, or commercial areas.
If you want, can you step closer to the mic?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Have been more on side streets or commercial areas, and many of the sites you have chosen so far, judiciously, have been along Mariners Island Boulevard, which is kind of a no man's land for residents. It's a commercial area. But this is right in the heart entrance of our community. And for this reason, I do feel that it has an aesthetic character that should be considered. The second part of my presentation has to do with something which is discussed but not shown on the application itself, and that is that PG&E, to my understanding, disallows the placement of the smart meter box on a median strip, so that therefore such smart meter box will be obliged to be placed on a sidewalk near this median strip. So placing a thing on a median strip now it gets into a larger construction project because we have to put the thing separately. And in the application itself, in the photo simulation, they do not show it. They simply don't show a smart meter box on the street or anywhere. But it is my understanding, and I certainly could be wrong, I'm not expert, that such a smart meter box is required, though it has not been shown. In the drawings of the schematic, unlike the photo simulation, there is a drawing of such smart meter box. It appears to me, although I am unable to be clear because I'm not a professional reader of such drafts, that it would be located, if you could do the next slide for me, right here, somewhat near that tree, which is on the grassy lawn and natural hedge that our gardeners keep in this pristine condition. And we have one tree on another tree on either side of the driveway to our townhome community. And from the drawn schematic, but not in the photo simulation, it appears to me that the suggestion is to put that smart meter box right there, maybe just to the right of the tree, as best as I could figure out, at the entrance of our homes. To me, this does feel intrusive for all of us who are entering that driveway. Now, I have a suggestion, if we could move to the next slide, that across the street, and there's your pole, there's your subject pole, it is simply taken from the point of view of the driveway. Immediately across the street is a large empty area, which is not near anyone's home, it's near a tennis court belonging to the Harbortown community. And I don't see any reason why that smart meter box couldn't be located to that area, which is very clearly less evident and simply we don't drive past it in this manner. So that is if we are unable to locate the original pole that is in our egress and ingress area, if we're unable to change it, because perhaps you guys have come to that conclusion already based on the presentation you made, I would suggest the consideration of moving this smart meter box to that area, which would be away from our residential area and in a much more, less obvious spot. And that is the entirety of my presentation tonight. So I meet your time. I'm only done in 5 minutes and 38 seconds.
Okay, you still have 10 minutes.
Well, I've said what I have to say.
Did you have everything you wanted to say?
Well, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, I could go on and on, but I think, what's the point? I bring it to you the way I see it. And I'm suggesting to you that there's two components, that this is really quite a more significant placement than it would perhaps otherwise appear. And the second, there is, I believe, an associated smart meter box not pictured in the photo simulation that we could potentially relocate to a less intrusive location if we still must keep this particular pole as our subject.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Good evening.
Okay, we'll open to comments from the public. Anyone in person? Any in-person speakers?
No hands raised.
Okay, and virtual. Okay, and virtually no hands raised either. Okay, so we have no public speakers. Okay. If no public speakers, I'll bring it back to the commission before we make a motion. And the motion will be, do we move forward or not move forward with the appeal of the approved wireless permit? That will be our motion. Do we move forward or not move forward with the appeal? So, commissioners, any final questions?
I do.
Please.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Reed.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So just to confirm, so thank you for that presentation. And just to confirm, is there a smart meter box required?
Yes, Commissioner, there is a smart meter box, ground-mounted equipment associated with this pole.
And is it in the location that Ms. Komatsu said?
Yes, their draft construction drawings are showing it in that location.
Okay, great. And when reviewing these types of applications, does staff look at potential alternatives to different pieces of the infrastructure, or do you kind of take it or leave it in your review?
Typically in our reviews, the focus is actually the wireless facility. Ground-mounted equipment, that is permitted during our encroachment permit process, and that's where we can provide further comments on construction documents for things that are not related to the antenna or pole-mounted equipment.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I got confused there. So the ground-mounted equipment goes through a different permitting process?
It's included in our review here, but like the final approval of it is in the encroachment permit process. So right now we're approving the wireless.
Just the pole?
Yes.
So
the
there's a different process to approve the smart meter?
Correct. So they have to, for a full, let me just go through. The full wireless permit is you've got this permit for the pole location and the aesthetics, and then after that, they still have to get an encroachment permit to actually construct it. And that's where the constructing of the ground-mounted equipment, constructing of the actual facility on the pole, that's all permitted under an encroachment permit, which technically allows them to deploy their forces in the right-of-way and it covers everything like insurance and things like that.
I see. So would the inputs of Ms. Komatsu's, feedback be something that is considered in the encroachment permit process?
Certainly. And the smart meter, it's not entirely flexible where it can go, but it can shift 5 to 10 feet away from where they propose it on their plan. Typically, it needs to be close to the PG&E service point, which happens to also be...
those little circles in the sidewalk?
It's actually a larger vault.
A larger, okay.
Usually 3x5 or something.
Okay.
And it happens to be in that location. So there's a limited distance away from that they can put the smart meter. But they can shift it away, further away from, say, the entrance or things like that.
Okay, got it. And then the other question I had was, could you remind us on the alternative site though? There were no pictures of the alternative site, and I did not go, which would have been really smart.
Actually,
There were pictures?
yeah, actually, well, I don't know if there were pictures. There was an aerial shot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, with the poll numbers that I had sent out to everyone.
Oh, I got confused. Thank you. I thought that was historical data. I'm sorry.
Right.
Thank you.
No.
No, I did not see that. Okay.
Yeah, and I had that sent out, based on a prior appeal where we said we would want the poll numbers as well as the poll location.
Yeah, okay. You're one step ahead.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the alternative site, just to be clear, that site is closer to a house, like an actual house? Okay. Okay.
Yes, I can pull it back up if you want.
Yeah, and that's poll 1040, sorry, everyone, poll 1042. If you can pull that up, Jason. It was a very useful pictorial for us. Yeah, is that the one that I had sent? Could be sent. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I see, yeah, I see, it's by parcel 2928, right? That's the house?
It's on Schultz.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just to be super clear, and so the scope of today's decision is solely the poll and whether or not to approve or deny the appeal based upon only the poll infrastructure. Is that correct?
That's correct. The appeal is about the poll.
Thank you.
Commissioner, any questions?
So once this, do we have people from Crown Castle? Can Crown Castle answer?
Sure.
Yes, we have Crown
Yeah,
Castle.
Crown Castle, yes. Can someone?
You might know the answer to this.
Can someone from Crown Castle come up to the podium?
Thank you. So once this is installed, how long is the lifespan of this intended to be?
I'll speak for the wireless permit. It's given 10 years.
So it's permitted for 10 years.
That's right.
What about technology? How long do you expect this technology to be the latest technology?
Excuse me, hello. Taylor Blandford, I'm the permitting agent for Crown Castle. The lifespan of the technology is variable. Right now, it is the latest and greatest. I may yield to one of my other representatives to give you a bit more of an idea of these radios, but the intent is for them to be here for the duration of the 10-year lease. That's the intent of the permit.
Reason being is that I know in some places they're using different kinds of technology, even underground. So the question I'm asking is, which you've answered, just how long do you expect for this to be a visual thing in the space for the community? So it's 10 years or so is what you're expecting. Okay. Has there been a case where you've installed something and then taken it down at the end of its life?
I do not have that answer. I apologize.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So, Commissioner, was that the life of the permit or the life of the technology?
Well, I was asking both.
Okay.
Both questions.
Yeah, because if we look at the permit, this process has been in place since, I think we officially 2017, 2018, Brad? Yeah, so I don't think any permit yet has exceeded its 10-year.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Please,
Sorry.
yep.
I'm sorry, so at the conclusion of the permit, if the company does not renew the permit, the thing could just stay up on the pole into perpetuity?
No, it's removed.
One of the conditions of the permit is that it's taken down if it
It's
expires.
taken down.
Okay, great, thank you. I was a little confused. Thank you, great.
No, when we wrote the ordinance, that we did put that in. All hardware is removed. Could you come back with Crown Castle? I have a couple of technology questions. Did you finish?
No, I've got another if we can.
Oh, please, yep, please.
Oh, yeah, you might want to step to the podium.
Yep.
Technology questions. Do these require backup power? And if so, where is that located?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So in regards to backup power, these don't have any freestanding like generator considerations. They are tied into the PG&E system that is that power point. So it is tying into the grid power source.
Okay, so if the grid goes out, then these are not powered? Or is there's no battery power?
I don't have that answer. I apologize. My understanding is that the grid is the primary source there. We can circle back around on that one.
Okay.
I do apologize to the commission. I want to clarify, like I said, I'm a permitting agent.
True.
So I am not the designer. I'm not the engineer here. I'm happy to try to field questions as I can, and I'm happy to follow up with city staff as needed.
So what would you like to have followed up, your question?
Well, follow-up question would be the energy source, where it is, if there's a backup battery for it, where that is stored.
Yeah.
Essentially, I mean, is that on the device, on the pole, or is that part of the smart meter, or where, and how big is it?
Sure. I think all of these are run with electricity off of PG&E, and that's why we have the smart meter.
Right,
But we'll let.
right.
Yeah, hi
Yeah,
there. My name
hi.
is Michael Cintron. I work directly for Crown Castle. I'm their permitting manager. I do have the answer to this. I just wanted to give it to you. The site is tied into PG&E power. Right now, there's no backup battery or generator attached to it. Many of like the traditional macro towers that you have that were deployed over the last 20, 30 years, those provide a broader coverage. And so those do have generators, and there was recent state law in order to help help the deployment of generators in like emergency scenarios. These are more meant for like high density data applications, more like video on your phone as opposed to like a call, even though it's going to do that as well. It does not have a backup battery or generator associated with it,
Right.
at least at this time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll chime in on that, too. Once again, this was also discussed when we were developing this ordinance back in 2017, 2018 timeframe. Backup batteries and generators are visually very apparent. And I think that was something we wanted to try to stay away from, and was possible to do. And it's possible to do because there'll be many small cells installed, and in fact, there are many small cells installed from this throughout the entire city, in neighborhoods throughout the entire city as well. So the most visually appealing was the small smart meter, which I think I recall is it roughly, how big is that? It's roughly the size of a...
Maybe like a foot by 6 or 7 inches.
Yes, it's...
In this instance, we're not able to install it on the pole because PG&E doesn't allow that on median poles for safety purposes. They're worried that their workers are going to have traffic incidents, and so that's why with this application, we were required to place a meter pedestal on the sidewalk, as was previously mentioned. But for the vast majority of the applications, and all of them that are not on median poles, we do place that smart pole meter on the pole. So the other applications that you've seen, the appeals you've seen, they have it.
Right.
Whenever possible, we do that.
Yeah. So, okay. And all of this, believe it or not, was discussed all the way back then. So it's nice to actually see it back in discussion in that respect. So you have posed your question, and is it clear to you what Commissioner Riddlemeier's question is? So, Oh, it has been answered. Okay. All righty, great. Any more questions on, okay. Is this a 5G installation, or does it toggle between 5 and 6? Does anybody know? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so it'd be a 5G installation, yes.
Okay, it is a 5G installation, all right. And this is, I have to share with everyone, one of probably, I think we have probably 100 installations at least throughout the city, in neighborhoods and on collaterals and main streets as well. Like I said, I did go and visit the site. I don't think the folks at 916 Shoal would like to see this in their, and I looked at their window, and it would be pretty intrusive in their window. I also looked at okay, good. I looked at number 12, so we can follow everyone on the map there. I did visit number 12. That's very intrusive. It's roughly about 6 p.m. on a clock. I did also look at number 13, which would be 9 on a clock, and that's also in someone's window, though less obtrusive. So, the least intrusive places we have is what has been selected, and number 11, which would be 3 o'clock on a clock. And I believe Crown Castle has determined alternative 11 may not have the coverage that the selected pole would have. Is that correct?
If I'm remembering correctly from the alternative site analysis, the site that was located is best for the network. As you can see, it's still an acceptable alternative. It's just not the ideal alternative. It's not the ideal site in this neighborhood.
Number 11.
Yes.
I'm talking about number 11. Jason, do you want to add? I see you, it looks like you want to add some comment there.
Oh, yeah, just to clarify, yeah, that on the alternate site analysis, that was the response, is that it was also an acceptable pole location. However, it didn't meet their objectives for coverage and capacity as strongly as the proposed location.
Right, okay. Okay, that's my question there. After visiting all sites and looking at them, I have no more further questions, but I believe Ms. Kumatsu would like to come back up. Yeah, please.
And I think Jason may know, the Crown Castle people certainly will. Could somebody please
Could
tell
you
me?
go to, if you can go to.
Pardon. Could somebody please tell me how tall is the smart meter?
Please, Crown Castle, I think, can you come back here? Crown
As
Castle?
well as how wide?
Yeah,
Give us just a minute to pull up the plans and tell you exactly.
That's up to these people, not me.
that's fine.
Actually, no, the smart meter is out of scope for today.
Oh, good point. The smart meter is out of scope for today's hearing, but it would be nice, let's see if we can take that, let's see if we can respond to that question. I seem to recall something of 6 inches wide by a foot tall. Please come up to the podium. Yes, and I do recognize it's out of scope, but let's just take this one and then we'll make a motion.
It's going to take me a moment to pull it up, but so the smart pole meter is what would go on a non-median street light, and is that 1 foot by like 6 inches or so. This is a ground-mounted meter, so it is somewhere in the range of like 4 feet tall, maybe a little bit taller. I can pull it up and give you the exact dimensions, and there's certain requirements by PG&E that have to be met in relation to that ground-mounted meter.
Okay, thank you. And this is out of the scope of this hearing. We're really just focused in on the receiving, the transmitter and the receiver up on the top there. So if you have a question on, hopefully that answers your question. Okay.
But it is slightly within the scope of the meeting because, as the gentleman said, if the pole was not on a median, the 4 foot tall.
Please go to the mic. Yeah.
Sorry.
Please go to the mic. Yep, you need to go to the mic.
As
Yep.
this gentleman indicated.
Very good.
And this brings it back to the scope of our discussion of the pole, which is on a median. The pole on the median does require an adjacent, at least 4-foot tall, they don't know how big it is, object. It's considerable. And you're talking about many in our community as well. If it is, as the gentleman said, a single pole that is not in a median, I believe his figure was quantified in inches. It was small. So this is actually quite a considerable aesthetic difference to consider. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no more public comments, questions from the commission? Okay, please, Commissioner Riddlemeyer.
I'm still not quite clear on why I think it was alternative 11 is, yeah, the one that's marked 11 there. Did I hear unanimously that that was not a good choice, or is there some wiggle room there?
It's not that it's not a good choice. It's still an acceptable pole in the grounds of our design criteria. The difference was that Crown Castle is allowed to pick between the two. They're both acceptable poles. For them, they chose the proposed location because it met their objectives. Stronger than pole 11. And coverage and capacity are one of the things that the city cannot regulate.
Okay. So what would happen if 11 were chosen?
I'll leave that for Crown to answer. If what's the difference between using pole 11 and the proposed pole?
I can help speak to that. So the coverage objective that's been mentioned a couple times is the grounds for choosing between the proposed location and pole 11. The coverage objective, more often than not, if you look at the map image that we've got here, is where folks live. The intention is to increase 5G service and speeds and reliability. So it's often closer to those areas. That being said, that gives you an idea of where the coverage objective is. The difference between these two is that if you were to move from the proposed alternative to pole 11, you would move further from the area that the coverage objective is intending to support. A point of clarification is that for 5G services like this, there's a pretty significant difference when you're 200 feet or more away from a proposed location. So alternative 11 also, I would like to indicate, if I'm remembering correctly, is also a median pole. So it would be further from the coverage objective, and it would still require a meter pedestal placement at the nearest point of power per PG&E regulations. So I think in short, it would move the proposed installation further from the area intended to be covered, and it would still require a meter pedestal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make a comment here. I asked if this was 5G, and I did that specifically because 5G has got a pretty tight range of roughly about 300 to 400 feet. So there is some credence to, if we move to 11, we're going to miss a whole bunch. If you do it at 11, it will be just a matter of time before we have to move to the proposed location anyway. But so with that, I'll just put that in there. That moving poles, when you're particularly on 5G, the wavelength is very short. It does affect coverage. So no more questions. Do I have a motion to move forward or not move forward with the appeal of this approved wireless permit?
I move to deny
You move to deny.
the appeal.
Okay. I will move to approve the appeal.
Commissioners, if I may
Commissioner?
clarify.
Right. Please,
Um,
Commissioner Riddlemeyer, yes.
So if we approve, that means they go with the proposed one.
Yes.
So
Wait,
No,
if
no,
I
no.
if I could
No.
interject, I think
Yes.
just
No.
for clarity. So if I understood Commissioner Narita's response, she said to deny
The appeal.
The
Deny,
appeal.
deny the appeal.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
So.
Right.
So sorry,
think
did I
you're-
say that wrong?
think you're-
No,
think-
no,
Did I say-
no,
did I
no,
say
you
that
did-
wrong?
You did it correct,
I think you're
yes.
saying the same thing.
Right, yes.
But I also want to suggest that you need to take action on that motion before you entertain another motion as well. So you probably need a second and then a vote on that motion.
Okay, the motion is whether we deny or approve the appeal.
Correct.
That's it.
Yep, and the
Right.
motion's been made to deny the appeal.
Right, a motion has been made to deny the appeal.
Yes.
And I would second that.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
That's why I was confused.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Commissioner Riddlemeyer?
I deny the appeal. I do have a question about the smart meter process, what that's going to be, but I think I can leave that for later.
That's the encroachment, that's a whole separate.
Right,
that's a
right, I know.
Permitting process.
Yes.
Please, yes, Brad.
I know the commissioners are struggling with that. I do want to also say that there's not a lot of flexibility at times with the power from PG&E because they have certain locations where they can actually provide that power. So don't know the answer because I wasn't involved in this, but the plans that have been presented might be the location that the applicant was given from PG&E that PG&E can actually provide power to this small cell device. So just wanted to let you know that too. There's not a lot of choices when you dealing with PG&E. So.
Right. Okay, and did you, what was your response?
Deny the appeal.
Deny the appeal. Okay.
Susan, excuse me, Commissioner or Chair Rowinski,
Yeah.
could you just do the vote at this point in time?
Sure.
On the motion?
So it's, just to
Yeah,
clarify, it's a motion to deny the appeals,
right.
and the wireless permit will be approved.
Yes.
Yes.
You made the motion.
Yes.
Commissioner Rowinski seconded. Now we're going to take a vote.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yep, Madam Clerk, yep.
Commissioner Narita?
Is my vote to aye my own
Right.
motion then? Thank you.
Aye. Chair Rowinski?
Aye.
And Commissioner Riddlemeyer?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Komatsu, for bringing this to our attention. You know, this is how we work out our process. It's not perfect. There's hundreds of homes, and we do hear appeals. And there could be a couple of things, a thing or two we could work on based on your input. So on behalf of the city and the commission, thank you for taking your time to speak to us.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Great pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so, all right. The next item on tonight's agenda is under old business, and it's for the public and commission to receive an update on the 2022 Rail Corridor Transportation Management Association Annual Report. Staff is recommending the commission to make a motion to recommend City Council accept this report. We'll open up with a presentation from Sue Ellen Atkinson, our Principal Transportation Planner, and Paul Krumpa of Krumpa Consulting. Their presentation will be followed by questions from the commission for Sue Ellen and Paul. Then we'll move to comments from the public. Once all public comments have been heard, I will bring the discussion back to the commission for a final couple of questions, followed by the commission's motion to deny or approve this report be sent to City Council. Okay, Sue Ellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Rowinski and Commissioners. Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner with the City's Public Works Department. I have with me tonight Paul Krupka from Krupka Consulting on behalf of the Rail Corridor Transportation Management Association for the 2022 Annual Report presentation. I'll turn it over to Paul to present the report.
Thank you, Sue Ellen. And good evening to Chair Wawinski and members of the commission, staff, and public, virtual and otherwise. We want to go over quickly this report. You've got a good staff report. You've reviewed that, I expect. Cover the TMA itself, project status, trip generation monitoring, and then an overview of project TDM plans and the survey of members. Next slide, please. The TMA really is in essence, is responsible for the TDM program and annual trip generation monitoring and reporting. Next. In terms of project status, virtually all of the projects except Bay Meadows Phase 2 are complete. Bay Meadows Phase 2 is partially occupied, and construction has continued with the Station 1 completed in 2022. Next slide. Looking at the actual trip generation of the member projects, compared to the short-term goals established in the plan, all but Delaware Pacific and 2000 Delaware were below their goals. Delaware Pacific was above its goal, as stated in the staff report, by 15 trips, and that is the situation this year. I would note that the results showed a pretty substantial increase in 2020 traffic and traffic generation in total, with 844 p.m. peak hour trips, compared to 2021, which was about 460 peak hour trips. And for reference here, I'm looking at the 844 p.m. peak hour trips compared to the total short-term threshold of 1443. So as you can see, it's around 60% or so of the total threshold. Next slide, please. I'm going to flip through. I'm going to talk about this trip generation for Bay Meadows, and then we'll flip through these exhibits. The exhibits that you see in front of you are examples of simple gateway to gateway travel paths, if you will. So, and these two are numbers 1 and 2, and it simply shows in the red arrows where the paths are, where people traditionally enter and leave the project site. Trip generation is generally captured by measuring the total traffic entering and leaving the project area at these 6 gateways, and then also looking at the estimated time it takes a typical driver during the peak period to enter and leave all these different paths from 1 to 6, 1 to 5, 2 to all the other 5, etc. The the trip generation calculation is simply the total trips entering and leaving at these six zones minus the amount of estimated through traffic, that traffic that does not stay in the zone for any notable period or a trip purpose. So indeed, trip generation excludes through trips. Next slide. And you can just pop these through. These are just the pictures of the different nice pictures, right? The results are shown in this slide. In 2022, the total peak period, that is 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., trip generation was 5,683 trips, or nearly 56,700 trips. In the peak period, approximately 52% of that total occurred during the peak period of 4:45 to 5:45 p.m., and that was 2955. And just for comparison, I wanted to show the numbers from the 2021 report. As I mentioned, in terms of the previous member project trip generation, there was a substantial increase in traffic entering and leaving the study area. Total trip generation 4,088 versus 5,683 this year. And the peak period number was substantially less, peak hour number was substantially less as well. Next slide. So in summary, the finding was that the trip generation for Bay Meadows Phase 2 this year was slightly over the threshold of 2,878, roughly 60, 70 trips over that threshold. So or 3% roughly. So qualitatively, if we just look at it, it says that there is growth in commercial activity, generally speaking, and my own observations when I was doing travel time surveys indicated a substantial increase in activity, both traffic on the streets and people on the streets would indicated the same thing, essentially anecdotally. I didn't count those differences myself, but the numbers show that was the situation. Given that this is the first time that we've measured Bay Meadows Phase 2 exceeding the threshold, we wanted to give the opportunity to Bay Meadows to do a little pre-review, I should say. And Bay Meadows representatives noted that the increase that I'm talking about, the increase in trips, the increase that I found, was not really corresponding to the observed activity increase. There really wasn't much of an activity according to Bay Meadows. And they also simply raised some concerns about the timing relative to the Clean Water Project ongoing, and as well as the concern that the full opening and use of 28th Avenue and 31st Avenue crossings may have an influence on through traffic. So these are just some points. I know that Sue Ellen raised those points in the discussion, but we just wanted to highlight them now. Next slide. We again, this year, as for the third time I believe it was, we've done a comparison or a review of at least a qualitative review of project TDM plans. This slide and the next one simply shows some of the typical measures that are used, from bicycle parking to transit provisions and alternate modes. Next slide, please. Parking management, how they handle parking, alternate work schedules, and on-site amenities. Next slide. From the survey, we've done a survey over the past 2 years, and really looking for basic information that has to do with how the projects use and manage transportation demand management to affect a reasonable adherence to the plan and the desire to reduce trips. Next slide, please. The basic highlights I thought were, I think, are talking about the way that programs are managed, what kinds of programs are preponderant, if you will, or primarily used. Next slide, please. And then how the projects actually distributed and distributed TDM information and methods to use performance or to track performance. Next slide, please. And I think I'm going to turn it back to, no, I'm not. Oh, summary, excuse me. I was looking at the wrong piece. Sorry about that. Anyway, in summary, as I've stated, all but one of the TMA projects were below short-term thresholds, and the one outlier is Delaware Pacific in 2000 Delaware. Bay Meadows came in with a higher trip generation than the threshold this year. We looked at project TDM plans, and we talked about the survey of members. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sue Ellen.
Thanks, Paul. In terms of the non-compliant projects, per the Rail Corridor Transit-Oriented Development, or TOD plan, projects that are non-compliant are expected to, in the first instance, recommend TDM measures to add, and then in instances thereafter may be required to implement mandatory measures. So I just wanted to provide that reminder. For Delaware Pacific, they began participating in a Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC, regional fare program just after these counts were taken, I believe. They were discussing taking part in that pilot last year when their project was slightly over their threshold as well. That program offers free transit passes to all of their residents that are able to be used on all transit agencies in the Bay Area, and they have reported good success with that from residents that I've spoken to there. 2000 Delaware provided information after the staff report was published. So the information there is that they implemented a virtual lobby kiosk with transportation information. They do continue to provide Clipper cards and transit information at move-in. In terms of Bay Meadows, they have new tenants that are moving into commercial spaces this year that will be implementing additional transportation demand management measures. They did report that the residential units do not have any TDM measures that have been implemented, and staff has discussed the new data collection methodology for future years that the TMA is elected to utilize, and I understand they just entered a contract with a new data collection consulting firm for next year. So in summary, the staff recommendation is to receive an update on the 2022 Rail Corridor TMA annual report and make a motion to recommend City Council acceptance of the report. Just to clarify that, the TMA is required to prepare the report on an annual basis. The commission reviews the report and then recommends or does not recommend acceptance of the report to City Council. This is not an acceptance or approval of what individual projects are doing or if the projects are meeting or not meeting those trip reduction requirements. It is solely an evaluation of, did the TMA submit a comprehensive report, and do you recommend acceptance? So with that, concludes the staff presentation. Paul and myself are available for questions, and then we also have John Ford, who is the Executive Director of the TMA from commute.org, available on Zoom.
All right, thank you. We'll start with some questions. Commissioner Riddlemeyer, please.
Thank you for your report. I do have some questions from in the packet. They weren't in the slides that you just showed. There's a question 17. I'll just dive right into it.
Can you pull up the presentation? Yeah, because I'm going to refer to it.
Okay. The presentation or the slides? I'm talking
the slides.
The packet. Yeah.
The slides that we just went through. Is that what?
Oh, no, I'm talking about the packet that we
okay.
that was linked to the agenda. Right, the report itself.
The meeting packet.
Towards, I guess it's towards the end of it. There's a list of questions and figures. And my question specifically is question 17 about metrics used for tracking performance of the programs.
Oh, okay. From the survey of members.
Right. So there were just 12 members responding to this, is that correct?
Got it. I'm flipping down the thing
Okay.
As you speak. Go right ahead. I'm listening.
Well, on the figure, there's almost 60% reported that the performance is not tracked. I just want that explained, if you can. What does not tracking performance mean for these? Yeah, that one.
I just have to.
Is it possible to project that onto our screen? No. So
Right, so should we,
Right now. But
yeah, so others.
should we speak
You're
to
gonna
what
try.
it's showing?
okay, she's going to try.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and this way we can all see what is being discussed here.
Right.
So yeah, I'm just scanning the numbers. Performance is not tracked. Yes, indeed, that's your key point. If we have 12 members and over half of them don't track, what that means is this is what they reported to us in the survey. I don't know anything else about what or why, to be honest.
Okay.
They should.
So they're not tracking, this is saying that almost 60% are not tracking their own performance.
That's correct. That's
But
what it means.
You went out and tracked on your own.
Right, yes, let's back up just a half a step. The intent of the survey itself was that the TMA put together the survey and the questions with an interest on simply understanding more about what and how the members did in terms of managing or introducing and implementing TDM measures or a TDM program. So and this is, I think, the third year that we've done it. And the whole idea was, it was started during COVID, of course, when we didn't do any counts. So the whole idea was really to start the conversation between the members and between the members themselves and the TMA leadership. So that's where we are. So the survey itself didn't have anything to do with the analysis that I did and reported to you.
Okay. Okay.
If I could just add on to that, in the project conditions of approval that require implementation of the TDM plan, they're required to implement their approved TDM plan, but by and large, in the projects that have been approved in the past in the rail corridor area, there's no tracking requirement.
Okay, thank you. And I'm wondering what the lessons learned are from this report. What are the lessons learned for the TDM?
I think the devil is in the details in terms of data, but the lessons learned here in my overview, as the professional doing the work, that the project, the report itself did address those matters that are required of the TMA and the report. There was nothing missing or lacking. I think what you're really getting at, I think is what are the observations about trips and traffic and so forth. And my observation there is that indeed traffic is increasing. I started doing the reports for the TMA at the 2019 report. So that report was issued in 2020. So the difference between even 2019 and 2023 is a marked increase. So we are seeing what you would expect as the area grows out, especially Bay Meadows, Phase 2 grows out. So we're seeing that. We're seeing we're reaching thresholds. We're nearing thresholds at some of the projects, and one project stands out as an outlier, actually. And I think we need to understand together, I'm saying collectively, the city and the project owners, if you will, really have to understand each other about what's going on and what might be creating these matters. The fact is, we're measuring against some data that was done, the traffic analysis that was done some time ago, and it's just a measure, and it is really that. It is a stake in the ground, saying, okay, at this year, this project generated this much traffic. But generally speaking, I'm seeing a relationship of activity and trip generation. So those are balancing out. Most of the residential projects are fully occupied now, and you should see a reasonable amount of activity and traffic. And then the Bay Meadows thing is an interesting one. We are dealing with, in terms of lessons learned, we're dealing with a complicated measurement using capturing, in this case, partial license plates over the 2-hour period, and trying to capture those at all the lanes approaching and departing those gateway areas. And it's complicated. And then this last year, there was a need to the traffic counter really just didn't believe in the ability of the temporary license plate readers to really perform well for them. And so they went to a manual method, which is labor intensive, and people out on the roads actually handwriting portions of license plates. So it's the data, I think, is all good data. The intent is the actual practice is correct. It is the way we do what are called origin destination surveys to understand what the actual trip generation is and through trip activity. So it's all very, very solid. I think as Sue Ellen intimated, the matter is we really have to look at what is the behavior. Maybe some more investigation to understand some data and actual empirical information about what's going on at Bay Meadows, and also some empirical information about actual travel behavior at some of the projects. Those kinds of questions are coming up in my head, and I know it's Sue Ellen's job and her team's job to kind of do that coordination and report to you. But data and details is where the answer lies, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Narita.
Thank you. Great to see you again. Thank you so much for the
Nice to
report.
see you too. Thank you.
So thank you for that assessment on lessons learned and data and details. So could you share, or maybe Sue Ellen share, what is Bay Meadows' concern then about the data collection that led them to then obtain a different consultant for the future? And does that mean that in the future would we be expecting to receive some sort of aggregation of data across different consultants that the TMA aggregates together? What is happening there with these different decisions?
Well, let me start. All I'm going to say is that what I was in the meeting with the representative of Bay Meadows, Adam, and John Ford, and we simply had a conversation, and there was no antagonism or anything. The basic issue about the data was that, hey, an increase in traffic, the increase in traffic that you measured doesn't, and trip generation that I estimated, doesn't jibe with their observation about activity levels. So they're basically saying a substantial increase that I reported in terms of trip trip generation would not match does not match their observation, and it's a general observation. They didn't provide data to support it. We don't, and the guidelines and the guidance don't require data to be reported about occupancies and parking occupancy and office occupancy, retail occupancy, and so forth. So he was just making an observation, and I think that's as far as I would take it. And I don't know if he's available to turn it off.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more information there, the TMA as a whole has contracted with a new data collection consultant for the 2023 counts. So it's not that Bay Meadows is utilizing a different consultant, and there's going to be multiple sets of data to aggregate together. In terms of the Bay Meadows results this year, when you're looking at data over a period of time, you're able to see where outlier data is, where there's an anomaly, something like that. With the large increase over last year and the points raised, not necessarily about the through traffic on 28th and 31st. I think that Paul has done a good job in terms of the methodology for eliminating through trips from the information, but I think that we're all aware there's been quite a lot of construction in the Bay Meadows area, on Saratoga, at the event center, et cetera, Delaware also, and that I can acknowledge that. So in terms of both the substantial increase over last year's data counts, the small amount, 3%, that they're over that trip threshold, and the high amount of construction activity and traffic diversion, and different traffic patterns that have been in the Bay Meadows area this year. That's why staff has recommended that we do treat this year as an anomaly. We'll see what the counts come back as for next year. It's difficult, though, when you're in a year-to-year analysis of determining at that point what's an anomaly. So we'd like to recommend, in light of those circumstances, that this year is an anomaly for Bay Meadows, but we will see where it comes back next year.
And thank you for that. And will the TMA's new data collection follow the same methodology that Paul used, so that we can, as a commission, continue to receive an apples-to-apples comparison year over year over year? Because my concern then is that we would have to treat next year as like a new baseline and da-da-da, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sensing a bit of a kicking the can down the road on some pieces of like trying, because we had a pandemic. Yes, I remember this theme very clearly in a virtual presentation you did when we were all on Zoom. Every year so far has been anomalous, but maybe that is actually our reality, and we just have to treat each year as such. So that's why I'm getting a little anxious about this common theme I'm hearing. And so will the data be an apples to apples comparison?
I offer yes, indeed. The basic measurements are going to be the same basic measurements as were made last year. So vehicles in and out, and number of vehicles that enter one location and leave another location are captured that way. Those are the things that were captured in this case and the year before. So yes, the data is going to be the same. It's going to be going to match the requirements set forth in the plan. And I think it's the way that this particular traffic analyst is viewing it. We'll probably have a little more information to help me do my job in a more efficient way too. So I don't see any issues, and I think you do have to. Sue Ellen mentioned it, and you mentioned this. Year to year. My experience is from 19 on, and that covers the pandemic. So I think we have to take that, let's take the pandemic for what it was, but we need to look forward. And I think you've got 2 very reasonable years of data so far. And look at 2023. I think we're going to have 3 sets of data that we can actually be confident with in making a finding. So I'm comfortable with it.
And then, thank you. And then, so Sue Ellen, alongside the report, do you submit to council like action items accordingly based upon the content of the report?
Not typically, no. The action is, or the requirement is that the projects through the TMA are submitting an annual report of their compliance with the trip reduction goals. We're not required to summarize or describe follow-up actions. That's a separate item there are a few projects that replied in the survey that they're not providing TDM measures. That's a separate action for our team to go back and look at the approved TDM plans after getting the raw data and determine which projects those are and determine what TDM measures they should be offering, and work with our colleagues in the planning department on those potential violations of conditions of approval, for example. It's also on my team to be working with the projects for any additional TDM measures that may be required to be implemented, but that's not part of the recommendation tonight.
Okay, understood. And then, but for those efforts, for instance, what are the consequences of some of these projects being out of compliance year over year?
To be frank, the consequences are that they are asked to add additional TDM measures. The TDOD plan states that at the first year, they can recommend a measure to add on their own. In subsequent years, the city may require certain items. The language isn't necessarily firm, and there are no fees or financial penalties that are assigned at this point.
I see. So fees and penalties would have to be a new piece of legislation through City Council, theoretically.
It would be required to be a new type of TDM ordinance, and potential penalties are something that we're looking at in the citywide TDM ordinance.
Oh, I see what you did there.
But City Council would be required to provide direction on that.
Got it. I understand. Until then, though, what exactly is the role of the permitting department in this effort? You mentioned them, but I don't know their role.
Oh, planning?
I'm sorry, planning department.
All of the projects in the Bay Meadows area that have been built went through the entitlement process within the city's planning department. So that means that they submitted all of their plans, and the conditions of approval for the projects are part of that project entitlement. So it was approved by a planning commission. The TDM plans for each project were approved at the time of project entitlement by the Planning Commission and or City Council, and then the conditions of approval for each project have the same approvals. So since project development of that nature is managed primarily by the Planning Department, we would need to look into the TDM plans, the conditions of approval, and then if there are any issues, we would work with them on next steps.
Okay, great. I had one other question, but now I forgot. Come back to me.
I think, actually, Sue Ellen, when is the first TDM? Was it 2017? I might precede Paul.
The first rail corridor.
The first
TMA report?
Yeah, was it 2017? I think they're called
At
20.
least.
Yeah, at least.
1990 Delaware Pacific, I think was the first.
All right. Anyway, I seem to recall I even precede you, Paul, on this. Right. And, it's, I have to share with you, I'm going to take my questions here, but I have to share with you, when I opened up the report, I wanted to see what the two properties were going to do, and they let me down. I was, right. They let me down. And because I recall last year, them standing in front here, and I asked them, what's going on? What's so different? And they said, we'll figure it out. And it isn't. And so, Sue Ellen, under this report, it mentioned we move from voluntary to mandatory measures. And are those mandatory measures, if I heard you correctly, these two properties have to include additional TDM metrics now?
It's not part of the report. As I mentioned, that is a different process that we need to undertake.
Right, I just want to make sure, yeah.
The properties have noted what measures they have implemented. We have yet to discuss additional measures.
Right, okay. This has been every year since I've heard this report, and I don't know why it is with these two properties. I'll be curious to see what happens with Bay Meadows Phase 2 next year, but these two have been consistently consistently and materially above threshold. I will say that. Here's a question here, Sue Ellen. So, assuming the report is recommended to City Council then takes the report. Do we do anything with it at that point in time? Does the city do anything with this report, or this objective has been completed? It could be the latter.
This following commission recommendation, the report is brought to City Council, typically on the consent calendar. And then the City Council accepts the report, and it's housed on the city server.
Right, okay. All right, so this is really just strictly the objective we have to, once again, it's a reporting objective, it's an important one, but it is strictly reporting and information. Okay, thank you. I just have one more question here. I thought, Paul, your survey at the end there was pretty interesting. And it mentions which TDM programs and amenities appear to, and this, by the way, is question 12 on page 256 of our packet tonight. And if we just want to pull it up just for the public so they have the benefit of also seeing what I'm referring to. That's 256, Sue Ellen, question 12. Thank you, yes. So my question here, which TDM programs and amenities do these properties offer? And so I thought this was very interesting holistically. But when we talk about delivery amenities, is this grocery and takeout food drop-off? I didn't know what delivery amenities were. Okay.
Oh, for the first item?
Yeah.
Typically, a delivery amenity TDM measure could be a designated location for Uber Eats, Grubhub, et cetera, to drop off, or for more traditional deliveries like Amazon, FedEx, et cetera. It could also mean a storage location within the complex for those deliveries, where things can be kept. For example, for food or grocery delivery, you can have the refrigerated lockers or a package locker, something of that nature.
Okay.
And I do think that from a travel demand, transportation demand management standpoint, having these kinds of amenities on site helps residents and occupants not have to get in their car and drive off the site.
And that was going to be my follow-up question.
That's why it's why it's one of many important measures that you can look at.
Right. It rated quite highly, and it's a little bit different than the amenities found on the bottom here. So essentially, the practical benefit of delivery amenities is possibly the reduction of short trips.
Right.
Okay.
That's why it's one.
Yeah, to me, that's very important. And I would keep an eye, I would dig into that metric a little bit more personally. And the other one too is I thought was family what is that? Support. That also rated somewhat high as well, and I don't know what that would be, family support.
I
The
think-
others were pretty self-explanatory, but these two,
Yeah, and I think what I would offer here is that you mentioned something important. The survey was developed by John Ford's folks at commute.org, so they're definitely very well ingrained with the practice of TDM in the county. So indeed, they felt that this array of questions then or measures was very reasonable. In my mind, I think that a discussion, staff and commute.org about these measures and how they really relate, they may not even relate to the TDM plans that were written for the particular projects. So, but generally speaking, what we're trying to do is simply find out what measures they use, using vernacular and measures that are being reported by many other people. And this is a first for this particular set of owners, right? So, it's an outreach, and that's about as far. Sometimes it's about as far as you can take it in terms of answers, because that it's just it really is a survey, and it's an answer, and you kind of have to take it for what it is, and not try to read much into it sometimes. But
Sure.
But the point and the genesis of it is very strong because it's coming from commute.org. Genesis of the actual survey.
right. And like I said, they're important. All of them collectively are important to reduce short trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, the number of short trips, and
Yeah.
therefore meet our threshold. I have one last question here on Delaware, 2000 Delaware and Delaware Park. Let me just see here. Do we know for those two properties, who does their TDM program management? And for example, on 244 of the report, and I put these page numbers as a way to find this information quickly. There's information regarding who manages the TDM report, and it was either in-house management, third-party management, or tenants.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Delaware Pacific, Mid-Penn Housing manages their own TDM programs. They're very experienced in these matters.
So Delaware and 2000 Delaware?
2000 Delaware, I'm not sure.
We have a representative here who could respond.
Oh, okay.
Good evening.
Sure.
Mike Wiley, 2000 Delaware. We have a third-party management, DJA, that's been managing this since about 6 months into the project back in 2016, and implements the TDM plans and makes sure that everything under the TDM plan is implemented and the tenants follow and provide as much information as possible. And then we as owners oversee that and make sure it complies, and John and their team helps out, and it's very collaborative with the city.
Right, so you're with 2000 Delaware, not Delaware Pacific, even though
Correct.
your two properties are
Yeah.
adjacent. Actually, I stopped off there today to look at your inputs and outputs, by the way. Actually, on my way to look at those cell towers. But, because I'm very curious what goes on with the properties. And we,
Good.
Yeah, but we're always over threshold. Any thoughts on that, Mike?
Well, I can provide a survey. We did a
Oh.
survey based upon this in 2022 to see where, let me get it for you guys.
Oh, okay, Mike, is that something you could give to Sue Ellen? Yeah, and then is there just one or two highlights?
Yeah, let's go through the highlights real quick, because we were
Yeah.
concerned with why the reasons when we're providing so much is part of the TDM.
Yeah, just one or two, things
Well,
that,
we answered very specific questions. First one was who works at home and who doesn't. And came on the survey, out of 60 units in ours, 32 of our units, they work at home.
32.
32 out of the 60, based upon the survey, 32 out of the 60 units work at home. So go to the next question is, okay, if you don't work at home, how do you get to commuting? And out of the remainder, 50% or 14 units were actually driving. Out of 60 units, drive to work. The other was using either carpool or transit or using other form. So we wanted to then find out, okay, if you don't drive, what are the reasons? A majority of those, well, really 50-50 was where their job is, it's inconvenient to use transit because we are literally a block and a half from Caltrain. And we have bus lines we're very close to transit. So as 50% said, hey, transit doesn't go where I work. The interesting is the other 50% was still a COVID-related or a fear and safety concerns of riding transit, mainly COVID. We still have an impact of the pandemic of people not getting on mass transit, and I'm one of them. I've taken BART one time since 2019. I don't like to get on BART. And so it was interesting to go to the survey, see what we can do, because finding it was a monetary issue, find more Clipper cards, more information. We provided the virtual kiosk and trying to get more information out to say that transit is safe. Okay, let's go through the concerns.
right.
Work with the MTA and get a better location, see where the people are working. That could be the next step. But when you get down to when you have 62 units and only 7 of them are driving because of inconvenience, it's really not the large percent. So,
Okay.
any other questions?
Nope, no other question. Okay. Commissioner Riddlemeyer.
Thanks for coming. That's great having somebody who's on the ground here. So you talked about, in your survey, you asked them about how they get to work. What about for their errands? Just, the grocery store, other things nearby?
Based upon the survey, we couldn't get into, like, if you're going, like, to get on the school thing, because you've got the buses, you've got different schools in different areas. How do your kids get to school? That's more of a personal thing that we didn't really want to get into, so we tried to bring down the questions mainly dealing with commute. That's the 5 to 6, the short-term stuff. We didn't get into how many Amazon trips, how many Amazon delivery you get. We're trying to deal with that. And where does Amazon drop off? Where do we have? We got anomalies, you saw, Chair. We've got 4 driveways going in for one project. We share a garage. So really, we have only 2 secured entrances into the garage, and what we focus on is our tenants, what are you doing? Yet we have to, for the TMA purposes, we've got to count all 4 driveways. So it gives us a skew, as we call it, because there's like, who are the DoorDash coming in? Are they parking? Are they going to the AM, PM, using our parking on the side? On independent people, because that's hard to manage. It's kind of different situation that we've got. And so we're trying to address that, making sure that both Mid-Penn and we direct, and we've got stickers, we have like off-site parking people on our side. We really have to manage our parking in and around those 2 driveways.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mike.
You bet.
Okay, glad you're here. And it looks like you're on top of it, too. Okay. Any questions from the public? Do we have any comments? In person? Virtual?
No comments in person or virtual.
You have one.
Oh, wait, no, just a little. It's John Ford.
Okay. Hello, John?
Good evening, and thanks for taking time to take my comments. It's nice to see you all. I can hear a little bit of a reverberation. Hopefully that's okay. Nice to see you all. Thanks, Paul and Sue Ellen, for the presentation, and Mike, it was nice to see you in person. Just a couple of quick comments. So the TMA, Commute.org serves as the administrative manager of the TMA, kind of just one of the roles that we have in the county. But the TMA membership themselves manage or are the serve as the TMA board. So we kind of are there just to make sure that it's an administratively managed. We make sure that we hire Paul through the board's decisions. What was also discussed was the change to the new data collection agency. So starting in 2023, the counts that will take place later this month will be conducted and managed by a new consultant with a new traffic data collection company. It's almost 4 times as expensive as the last one, but there was some concerns about the data accuracy, and some of the data collection techniques that were used in the past were just really kind of, as Paul was describing, just really challenging. So the previous consultant was going to a more manual count. So the new technology that we're going to be using, we think is going to be better. We do agree that it will be a kind of an apples to apples comparison, which I agree is a concern. And then to just kind of follow up on what Sue Ellen was describing, when projects are out of compliance, the TMA as a group knows about that, finds out about it, reads the report, and then it's up to them to decide whether the TMA as a group would take action and implement any TDM measures or not. Ultimately, it's up to the individual projects to make the corrections or additional TDM measures. The TMA is there if they choose as a group to implement programs that might help all the projects. They can, but they're not obligated to do so. And so far, in my experience over the past 10 years working with this group, there's not a lot of interest in helping each other. I do think that with the increase in traffic that we're seeing, and especially in the Bay Meadows Phase 2 project, that may start to change. So someone was asking, what are the lessons learned? One of the lessons I think that the group is learning is that traffic is increasing everywhere in the project area, and that may actually bode well for additional, TDM measures that they'll work on collaboratively. We continue to encourage it, but it's you can kind of lead them to the water, but you can't make them drink it. So, thanks again for taking my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. All right, thank you, John. If there's no further public comments, I'll bring it back to the commission for a final question or comment. Commissioner Riddlemeyer?
No more questions for me.
Commissioner Rita?
Questions and comments?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. No questions, but thank you so much to John for those comments. I really appreciate that context. I am concerned. I think that this is a bit of a canary in a coal mine report, if you will, because we're at this perfect intersection of just coming out of the pandemic with increased traffic. And on the other side, in terms of timelines, the TDM targets will continue to ratchet down. And so data accuracy, sure, but the trend is clear that, as Paul has educated us on, that traffic is increasing. So I don't really care if it's plus or minus 5%. What we need to be is actually minus 25%, because that is the long-term goal, right, of the target overall. No? You're shaking your head, Sue Ellen.
The trip thresholds, long-term, the trip reduction goals represent that minus 20%, 25% number.
Right, the 25%, yeah, we have to be at 25%.
At or below the threshold.
Yes. But that's the long term. Right now the thresholds are at the midterm, which is 16%, right? So varies, but a lot of the ones that are out of compliance are not at the 25% level. That's my point. Correct. So we gotta still do better. That holds, right? We will continue to be out of compliance or even worse if the trends even stay at this current rate, long term. Is that accurate, Paul, or is that not accurate?
I think there's a very important point you're raising. It's a very important point you're raising, but let's look at the numbers here real quick. I'm asking Sue Ellen to put up just the table.
I guess I did have a question. I apologize, Chair.
Let's go back to the table showing TMA project results. There you go, right here. Okay. This table tells the basic story. The trip threshold that you see here reflects is after applying the 25% reduction. So indeed, the threshold, the 25% threshold, is 40 trips, and that's actually 75% of the actual trip generation that was reported.
But this said short-term goal, and the short-term goals were only 10%, I thought, not 25%. Long-term goals, so you said it was 10, 16, 25.
Short-term, each project has individual goals that were set at the time of project approval. So some projects only have a short-term goal and a long-term goal. Some have that midterm goal. Each one is individual. So at the long-term, some are actually higher than 25%, which predated me, so I can't answer to that. I know that across the corridor as a whole, the goal is 25% trip reduction. So in projects that we're approving now, we are looking for that 25% trip reduction. I can't respond fully to why different trip reduction goals were approved previously, but some of the short-term and long-term goals vary, and it's project specific.
So project specifically, do they ratchet down project specifically, or are they at a steady state right now in this moment? Because I had thought they ratchet down.
I don't believe any of the projects are at the long-term goal threshold.
At the moment, so they will ratchet down when they hit the long-term threshold?
Yes.
Timeline?
Yes, because that's expected. The short term is the initial implementation when you think that you're getting like kind of the slow roll toward implementing when you're getting additional residents and employees, et cetera. The long-term goal is expected to be like full implementation of your TDM plan and getting the full benefit.
Great.
And the point I wanted to make is that in the report, there's a figure called Figure 4 that shows by TMA member the actual estimated trip generation figure that was used, and then the short-term trip generation goals are the actual thresholds that we're measuring against right now. So the net of it all is that the projects are underneath, all the projects except the one we've talked about a lot, are underneath those thresholds, and some substantially below those thresholds. The commercial ones especially are below the thresholds. So in that light, we're proceeding pretty well. In terms of this measurement, we're actually seeing that in the short term, we're doing pretty well. When we go to the longer term, you'll start to see a little closer. The trip reduction has to be more robust, and so you'll start to see a little bit different factor, though.
That's right.
I see your point is a good one, but I think I was hearing you say the sky's fallen already. Let's not.
No. Canary in the coal mine is not the sky is falling. The canary in the coal mine means pay attention now.
Yeah, pay attention. Yeah, well, that's right, exactly. So I'm with you on that. So I just want to make sure we were talking about the same apples.
And I think to that point, just bringing it back out of the numbers and percentages, et cetera, I think as John mentioned in his comments, he believes that the TMA members are taking note of that, that we are having trips increasing, that we are getting toward a point where they're going to be required to meet those long-term trip thresholds, and additional TDM measures may need to be considered in order to meet those goals. So I think that they are aware of that and will continue to be aware of that.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, John, for those comments, because that's what I wanted to reiterate. I do think that's a great idea. My concern, and this is just a flag for next year, so just bear it in mind, I don't want to hear any this is anomalous data. I don't have patience for that. And the reason why is because we need to reduce our TDM now. We always have to. And we've heard a common theme about DoorDash and Uber deliveries or whatever, for a couple years now. No. We're done. I'm done with that. I'm not entertaining any more of that starting next year. And so if those are the kinds of things that are noted in the report, I will have concerns about the report. But I am going to be fine with this report right now. Thanks, Sue Ellen.
And, I'll echo Commissioner Rita's point. I've been listening to these reports, 2016, 2017, and the data's got to be solid and it's got to start to give us direction. Because if I look at this, if we're looking at a TDM citywide, this is our test case, right? This is our test case. So we are really fortunate to have this. But we got to really, I'm curious in terms of will we move into long-term goals? I don't think, frankly, Delaware Pacific and 2000 Delaware, I don't know if you'll be graduating to those yet. I hope, but we can't even get out of the short-term goals. But when does a project move to long-term goals? That's my only question.
That, in some cases, does vary project to project.
And it does, yeah, I would
We have
imagine.
done some diving into that. For some, it is at full build-out of the rail corridor area, which we're getting toward. For some, I think it was correlated to the grade separation being completed.
Right.
That is something that we do need to do more additional research and looking into on the city side. We have limited staff and limited bandwidth, so it is certainly something that we're aware of.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think what might be useful for the next year's report, and this would be just for the commission and the public, is to understand when each project moves, to the long term. Let's just focus long term. I mean, it'd be nice, and I realize staff time is tight, between if you look at each project and what triggers them from short to mid, from mid to long, just so we have a sense of what are those events, and those events, and for each project, a corollary could be if time is tight, maybe we just focus in on what are the trigger events for each project to move them into long term, because it's clear to me with the increase of traffic, and I've heard this said numerous times, we're going to be moving to long-term here really soon. And we're done with the short-term, which was kind of our training period. So the needle's pointing in that direction. But it would be nice to know that next year, Sue Ellen. Okay. All right, everyone, if there's no more questions, do I have a motion to send this report, send this report to City Council? That is it a comprehensive, thought-out report for 2022? Do I have a motion?
I make a motion.
I'll second. Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Narita?
Aye.
Chair Narinsky?
Aye.
Commissioner Riddlemeyer?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you.
Can we take a water break? Just like 5 minutes. Just like 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. Okay. Let's do a 5-minute break here. Water. So let's return back at 9:10, everyone, and we've got a request for some water breaks. Okay, take care there, Paul.
Sorry, thank you. With the breastfeeding, I just process water really fast these days.
Yeah, no, we've got 5 minutes. We'll start. Okay. We're reconvening back for the October 11th Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission meeting. And we're going to be moving to, we've concluded the annual review of the Rail Corridor Transportation Management Association Annual Report. And we're now going to be moving to a presentation also from Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Plan for the City, and Susie Hufstander of Fair and Peers Consulting. They will be sharing with us tonight an update on the Citywide Complete Streets Plan. This item is for informational purposes only and does not require a motion of the commission. So Sue Ellen and Susie will start with a presentation. We'll bring it back to questions from commission, go out back to the public, see if there's comments, questions, and then bring back the discussion to the commissions for final questions and comments for Sue Ellen and Susie. Okay, please, Sue Ellen, thank you.
Hi, good evening again, Chair Rowinski and Commissioners. Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner for the city. As you noted, here tonight for an update on the San Mateo Citywide Complete Streets Plan. Maybe. Hang on. There we go. So tonight we will provide a brief background of the plan as a refresher for you all. You last saw this earlier in 2023. We'll provide a summary of the work to date now that we are in phase 2 of the project, including a summary of the outreach completed in phase 1. Summary of our current status on our draft policies for the plan and work that has started on the design standards manual, some draft recommendations, and discuss next steps regarding high need priority corridors. And then we'll be requesting some feedback from the commission this evening. First on the draft high needs corridors to make sure that basically we hit it on the nose and that what we show on the map is what jives with your experience in the community and what you've heard from residents. We're also asking for commission feedback on our draft policies. So just as a brief overview, a complete streets plan and this complete streets plan document will be a comprehensive playbook, if you will, for how we implement complete streets in San Mateo that will help us to achieve the multimodal transportation network plans that are outlined in the General Plan 2040 update that's been being reviewed this month and last month, actually. The idea behind complete streets is designing roadways in a way that they are safe and accessible for all modes of transportation, which include driving, biking, walking, transit, etc. This plan does need to be implementable. We don't want something that is just a very pretty document. We want something that tells us how to actually implement complete streets in the city and gives us a next steps for creating and enhancing our roadway system to be safe, reliable, and accessible. And finally, the complete streets plan needs to be developed through a collaborative process that we've begun working on already and we'll describe to you shortly. So this is collaborative with both internal and external stakeholders. So we have technical working groups, we have our elected and appointed officials, our community engagement, et cetera, wanting to equip people with the knowledge needed in order to provide feedback and make sure that their needs are reflected in the plan. So what does the complete streets plan include, and conversely, what does it not include? The complete streets plan really looks at all elements in the public right-of-way. So vehicles, goods movement, transit, biking, walking, green infrastructure. The only thing it does not look at in the public right-of-way is like sewer utilities, stormwater utilities, et cetera. So it's really focused on how we move people around and then the green infrastructure that complements our roadway network. In terms of process and timeline, today we're providing an update on where we are with our work in progress in phase 2, as noted by the large blue arrow. So we'll be doing a summary of our engagement from phase 1, an update on the high needs network recommendations, draft policies, and next steps. So first we'll walk you through our summary of outreach from phase 1. We started this outreach process with stakeholder interviews, so identifying stakeholders from various groups and audiences within the community with a primary focus on those groups that we don't hear from often in the engagement process. So the Latino community, young residents, families, et cetera, to gather background information and get an idea of how to outreach to various communities. We did the outreach through partnerships in part, and partnered with local groups such as the San Mateo Foster City School District, Move San Mateo, and Mid-Peninsula Housing to host engagement activities like our active engagement tours and some focus groups. We focused on multilingual outreach, which included Spanish translation at all of our engagement events, multilingual documentation. We conducted 2 focus groups, one of which was entirely in Spanish, and one of which was conducted half in Spanish and half in English. And then we also had multiple formats for how people could engage, including online, in-person, sticky notes, stickers, maps, et cetera, just to try to gain feedback however people felt comfortable. So summary of our outreach, again, we held 9 stakeholder meetings, and that started in spring of 2023. We hosted 2 focus groups in June and July that garnered a total of 45 participants. We had some active engagement events in which we got out in the community with residents and did walking, took transit, and took a bike tour around the city to really get feedback while we were on the go and actually utilizing our roadway network. And then we did 2 pop-up events at the city's 4th of July celebration and the College of San Mateo Farmers Market, and had really great interaction with residents there. We also did online engagement. The Social Pinpoint website closed in early September and had 537 unique visitors with over 100 people commenting, over 300 comments in total. And I do want to note that we had a simultaneous engagement effort for the city's local roadway safety plan, including an interactive map at the same time, and both efforts are sharing information back and forth. So in some way we get double the data to utilize for inputs, which is very exciting for us. Engagement comments. So this map is of locations that were noted as concerns or where people were speaking about during their comments. So you can really see some clustering of comments near the Hillsdale Caltrain station, near our other transit stations, and you can see other comments clustering around the downtown and north central areas as well. In kind of overview of engagement, the comments that we heard really condensed into 4 key themes. Improving safety for pedestrians and bicyclists was a topic that came up time and time again during our engagement activities. And also the need for traffic calming measures and more safety education for all roadway users were voiced as part of the solution process for safety. We heard about additional need for connectivity throughout our city, especially for public transit and recreational bike usage. We heard a lot about congestion on our roadways, and as a way to combat that, looking for mode shift engagement and education to encourage people to not use their car for every trip. And we also heard a lot about accessibility and getting around the city for people of different ability levels, including improving mobility options for seniors and those with disabilities. With that, I'll turn it over to Susie, and she will start walking through our draft policies.
Thanks, Sue Ellen. Great to be here. My name is Susie Hofstetter. I'm with Fair & Peers. So if we could just go to the next slide. So just to kind of begin with why this plan process has policies, why can't we just go ahead and have projects and key corridors and go along with it that way? And one of the things we've been hearing time and time again from internal stakeholders at the city and also from the community is that there's sometimes a lack of clarity on what is the direction from the city overall that helps make decisions related to tough trade-offs, or what exactly is the standard? Is it a guideline? Is it a recommendation? What exactly are we doing? And so part of the goal of having a set of policies is to provide clear and vision-driven direction that stems from the general plan in progress and then flows down into this plan to kind of inform the project recommendations that will be in the later phase of work. So the policies come at this stage so that we know what to do for the rest of it. A second key piece here is state and regional alignment. There are a lot of new policy frameworks coming out of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the Caltrans, the California Transportation Commission that has a lot of purse strings for key funding, and also from the Federal Highway Administration, all kind of really stemming around safety and complete streets. And so it's important for the local policy frameworks to align with those and really set the city up for success in funding. And finally, guidance for implementation. We'll get into this in some more detail with the more specific policy frameworks, but there is a need to also say how to do this and to help the city make decisions, whether there's a trade-off around use of roadway width or a question about what type of design to use. The policies really help inform those decisions. So how did we come up with these policies? Really, as I mentioned, the general plan update is the key framework for all of this, as well as the pieces underneath there. We also reviewed previous modal plan policies. So as we've presented to this group before, the Complete Streets Plan really stems from the layered network approach, which is using the existing bicycle, pedestrian, transit, vehicular plans from the city. And so rather than reinventing those networks, we're putting them together and trying to understand how they work together. So similarly, the policies are looking at those plans and trying to consolidate them into one clear document. And finally, we reviewed best practices, looking at peer agencies and other cities and what they're doing with their policy frameworks to really drive successful transportation programs. So to kind of walk through the four key buckets of policies. So these draft policy principles kind of hold within them other ones. And as I mentioned before, these come from federal, state, and local frameworks. And so we've listed on the side some of these key local and regional policies that inform them. But the four frameworks are prioritizing safety for all modes, funding and implementing projects, engaging communities, and rebalancing priorities. So I'll walk through each one and talk a little bit more about what is bundled within each of those frameworks and policy principles, and how that will shift the way that things work in San Mateo if this is the direction that this group, the community, and the city council decide to go. So prioritizing safety for all modes is really the top level policy framework priority across the entire project. Throughout the engagement and throughout, it's kind of coming from above and below in many ways, the priority on safety. So the safe system approach is a framework from the Federal Highway Administration, and it really shifts the thought about safety and saying, rather than each individual being personally responsible for driving their car correctly, which is part of it, there's a more holistic look at the roadway network as a system and the managers of that system, meaning the city, as equally responsible in making sure that it's a safe system. And so speed management, changing speed limits potentially, looking at new policies for design, all of these things are part of that safe system approach that really take that, that priority as the frontline framework for decision making. The second is rebalancing complete streets priorities. This is similar to complete streets policies that many jurisdictions have. And it really is the goal of having all modes represented in our roadway network. And so we have this priority of putting safety first, and then there's going to be a development with the design manual of street types that are related to circulation need along with land use. And so priorities like parking, transit, bicycle and pedestrian, comfort, auto congestion, there will be prioritization of those modes and elements within each of these street types to help drive decision making and make sure that there's a balance and that there's all modes represented in a coherent network for bicycles, pedestrians, transit in addition to vehicles. Finally, or not finally, I think there's one more after this, fund and complete streets. While it sounds like more of an implementation action, it really has a lot of policy frameworks within it. So this relates to the relationship with developers, and so there's implementation policies related to what developers will be expected to do in the public right-of-way that their frontage touches. There's clear guidance recommended within this policy framework on when council and commission input is needed. So this has to do with saying, you know, if the council passes this policy, they would approve X, Y, and Z types of safety projects so that there's more efficiency there, and staff would not need to come back to get separate approval for those. And there are certain thresholds that we're looking at for that. And then also prioritizing based on equity and safety so that there's clarity across departments of how projects are prioritized. And so that decision making is clear. And finally, engaging our communities. This policy framework has to do with having clarity in what the community is being asked for a given project. And so there's really a focus here on having a transparency and consistency across projects. And so there would typically be a range of types of input, and it would be upfront for the community to know, are you being told that this is occurring and just informed, and that is a type of engagement, or is there going to be a more involved community input process where the community is really providing more in-depth feedback about project alternatives? So those were the 4 policy frameworks. There's kind of a lot in there, but we also want to share a little bit more about the design standards that are part of this plan as well. Guide was from a former draft, and we've really pivoted to talking more about standards so that there's clarity for internal and external stakeholders, that it's not a suggestion but a requirement. So excuse us for the incorrect title slide there. So what is a design standards manual and why do we need it? So the policy frameworks that we just talked about provide a lot of information about what we want and what we want to achieve. And then when it comes to street design, this document interprets that policy for application on design. So there's a lot of dimensions and a lot of detail about what that looks like on the street. The measuring tool here is to indicate some clear and consistent enforceable standards. So it really allows, you know, if a developer or a designer or consultant who's doing a design project comes to the city to work on a complete streets project, they go to this document and they say, okay, the sidewalk is 10 feet wide in this neighborhood, and we know that that's what we're going to be doing. There's also going to be some process pieces of this related to the policies that help navigate places where all of the desired components may be extremely difficult to fit into the right-of-way, and there will be clarity in how to navigate those decisions. So as we were developing this, again, similar to the policy development, there was a review of existing policies within the city and also best practices. Then looking at which policies and measurements were enforceable and which were not, and then we developed this policy document, and from there, the complete streets design standards are really just saying, what does that look like? What are the dimensions involved here? So this is a sample table of contents. This document for the design standards is still under development, but this is generally a list of the types of street components that are in this document, and you'll see in the number 2, the San Mateo street types, that's something that will be developed in close coordination with staff and the community to say, here are our main groups of land uses and circulation needs, and here's how we would prioritize street uses on those, and that's a very key component that will need to align with people's understanding of this is what the street should look like in an industrial area, this is what a street should look like in a business district, this is what a street should look like in a neighborhood, and have a clear expectation that that aligns with community expectations. So this is just a kind of example of what this document will kind of look like in the end. There will be a goal of having it somewhat externally facing and also an internal document. So it has this dual purpose of being a manual for a designer who's looking for some details about how they're putting together their engineering drawings, but it also is meant to be a clarifying document for the community so that if they're curious about what is going on their street or in their community, they can understand where that's coming from and and what the thought process is if they're interested in digging in on that. Not all members of the community like to get into that level of detail, but it's important for it to be available so that people can understand what the engineers are doing and why. So to move on to the kind of recommendations portion, that all covered kind of the high level of what applies to the city network overall. And then we have also a more pared down look at what the real priorities are based on all of our analysis and the community input. So I think you've seen this before, if I remember correctly, from when Carrie was here, but if not, I'll just run through it briefly. Based on some key metrics like equity, safety, and the existing modal priorities, we put together a prioritization where safety was actually weighted to double the other metrics, including metrics like the youth high injury network. So there's a lot of data that goes into this, and the outputs are this heat map of segments and their prioritization. And so we see how they pop, and then through this, we went through this kind of smoothing effort, as we call it, where instead of having these little tiny segments that are all different colors, we look for where across an entire corridor of a similar character we see this kind of consistent light up. And so that's what we see on the next slide, which is our high needs corridors. And you'll see that North Central and downtown are kind of clouded out because of their separate ongoing planning processes. But we end up with 22 key corridors that really rise to the top with a lot of need. So this is safety need, different types of modal priorities, and also equity needs. There's a few lighter colored points, like the number 32 down at the bottom in San Mateo Village. And these are areas where a singular modal plan, like the bicycle plan or the pedestrian plan, the TOD pedestrian plan, might have had a very high priority project, but it was sort of specific to that mode. So it may have not scored high because it doesn't hit all of these different modal priorities, but it's still one that we know is high priority for a specific mode. And so it's in there kind of as a standalone item. Yeah, let's move on. So for each of these 22 high needs corridors, we're doing these kind of recommendations cut sheets. This is an example of what it looks like. This documents what has been previously proposed in other plans, what the current characteristics are, what the modal priorities are, and then has a kind of corridor-wide description and recommendation with some segmented recommendations of what could be potential near-term and long-term solutions to these needs. In the process of doing this, there's going to be an additional step for corridors that are very complex or have extremely high amount of community input, and our team has, a next step of taking just 10 of these 22 and developing further concept plans, and that will really tee up the city to pursue funding for those projects, because they're, instead of just kind of like a bulleted recommendation, that will have a concept, like an engineering concept and a cost estimate that the city can take forward for future funding opportunities. So that's what we see here at the bottom where it says priority projects. That's what will be happening next. And essentially we'll move towards, we have to kind of get that approval from council on these policy frameworks in order to develop those priority projects. Otherwise, we're not consistent with the policy. So we're going to kind of like make sure that we get those policy frameworks aligned, and then move towards the priority project development and then the final plan early next year.
All right, so that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. So just as a reminder, what we are asking for is confirmation of those high needs corridors, and we can bring up that map for your evaluation. It was also included in the agenda packet for tonight's meeting, and then feedback on those draft policies. With that, that concludes our staff presentation. Susie and I are available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, who would like to? Okay, Commissioner Narita. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much. Nice to meet you, Susie, and thank you, Sue Ellen, as always. Excellent presentation. So I have a couple questions. Sue Ellen and I had corresponded on email, and I will continue, I'll ask these questions because we're like, let's discuss it in the meeting. So I want to ask questions about the policy part first. So is it fair to say, Susie, that these policies are kind of like the North Stars of like what we want in envisioning what complete streets could look like for the city of San Mateo?
Yeah, the policies are intended to kind of bucket a bunch of different policy actions into one kind of principal area. We had previously had a lot more of these, and we went through a little bit of a consolidation effort to kind of say, okay, so if there's a separate policy about requiring developers to complete a checklist, and if there's a separate policy about prioritization criteria, how can we group these together into these principal areas? Ooh, my voice. That was interesting. Okay, yeah, so essentially trying to make sure that there's like these key principles that are understood by everyone, and then what's not shown in this presentation is each of these bullet points underneath has their own whole flesh out of what that means. Yeah.
I was curious, how public facing does the city want these policies to be? Because as described, Susie, they kind of are both internal policy guidance and could also be a bit front facing, public facing for the Complete Streets initiative. So what was that discussion like among the team?
The intent of the plan is that it's a public-facing document that also guides how staff are designing projects, how developers are designing projects, et cetera. So the plan in and of itself does serve that dual purpose already. So the policies really have to follow suit in both being guidance for staff and for others who are designing projects, but also for the community and understanding how we're implementing the concept of complete streets.
That's great. And to that end, I was curious, why were the concepts of equity, resilience, and now that I thought about it like health, not articulated proactively in the policies, in the 4 policies? The top lines, I understand things are nested in it, but as top lines, why not those themes?
I think a number of those are, as you mentioned, it's nested in how the priority corridors came to be. Safety is the topmost priority, which really relates to the health and wellness of the community members and using our transportation network. Equity is also an input in determining those high-need corridor projects. So that we are looking for feedback on the policy, so if that's your feedback, that we're happy to receive it. But those elements in terms of health and equity were baked into the assessment of what our high-need corridors are.
Got it. And then when it comes to the corridors themselves, moving to the second part, I had a question. On the map for the high-need corridors, there seems to be a gap in the in the priorities. When you go north-south, there's the north-central, which is a separate complete streets plan, but if you can pull up the map again, there's like there's nothing happening in like an entire area, basically, yeah, that area right there where the cursor is. What's going on there?
I don't have all of the data points behind that area in front of me. My inclination is that safety data is kind of the same.
It was more yellow. It was not.
Yes.
It was not red.
Yeah. So the type of safety data that we're using is kind of by nature reactive, because we're looking at where there have been collisions in the past and treating those as high priorities. So if there are areas of the community, like we see it in the area that you pointed out, but also kind of like up towards the hills, generally places that have lower density or maybe lower activity because there's not a lot of businesses, or maybe the single family homes are it's just single-family homes. Sometimes there's just less activity, and that results in fewer collisions. So that's one of the things that does show up here sometimes. Like specifically along South Grant Street, like what that gap is, I'm not exactly sure. My guess is that that's just lower speed area. Speed is a huge factor in safety. So, Grant Street is a pretty wide and fast street as it approaches that area around Hayward Park Station. So it may just be that there's a few very high conflict intersections that make that light up red, and by contrast, the next segment less so. But I would say overall, activity density and speed and like number of lanes on corridors tends to be the biggest factors in these safety metrics.
And when it comes to complete streets, is the goal to be reactionary more and trying to triage the most problematic areas? Because I know I'm also holding that we have our the safety plan that we had the update on, 2 commission meetings ago, I believe. So there's other ways to also, not to undermine safety, that is not my intention, but I'm just trying to understand, is the goal of the Complete Streets plan to be more reactionary rather than visionary? Because the inputs that I've heard so far have been where are the problems? But I haven't heard any inputs that said where could we envision building something new that could potentially offset those problems, but may not actually be the problem intersections or corridors themselves. So that's kind of what I'm getting at.
No, I can appreciate that comment. I think that with where we are right now in terms of our transportation network and how vehicle-centric our city currently is, in terms of complete streets or moving toward a multimodal network, we do have to, in a way, be reactionary to where we're seeing current safety concerns, because those are the things that we need to fix first or to address first. In developing the high needs corridors and looking at the citywide needs assessment, we, with your input, ranked safety the highest, importance in doing this. And in terms of safety, our inputs are collision data, because that tells us where it's unsafe. It does not include near miss information. That's information that we're getting from our community engagement. But inherently, somewhere where there have been incidents, there are likely to be unsafe conditions. And those are really the top areas that we need to be looking at in terms of realigning the roadway network. In terms of the local roadway safety plan, that's looking at an engineering toolbox of how we can assess roadway safety and how we can modify our roadways with more spot improvements. For example, if we're eliminating movements like eliminating a left turn or eliminating a through movement or something like that, those are more of the improvements that the local roadway safety plan is looking at. This plan looks at how can we take those areas that are currently perhaps not as safe and make them safer for all roadway users. And in that way, this plan is visionary because we haven't yet done that as a city, looking at how we can re-envision all of our roadways to make them safer for everybody who wants to use the roadways. Because once we make that first step of identifying the places that are least safe and improving those, we can get more people who are willing to be out walking, biking, and taking transit, also driving, but perhaps not driving as much or choosing to make different trips in other ways. At that point, then we can be looking at where do we want to have this? Where do we need to make additional improvements so that we can have that connectivity, et cetera? But if we're looking at safety as the top priority, we have to address those key areas first.
Great, thank you. And then when we're talking about and going to the presentation itself in the report, I wanted to ask a little bit more about bike lanes. So I have 2 questions. The first one was the feedback from the community was really clear that they really valued our park system, which is awesome. And I was curious if you had the chance to look into whether or not, do we have separated bike lanes to and from all of our parks, or what percent of our parks, or are there certain parks that are aligned with the light up area? I can't quite remember now, but that, where, that seems to be potentially like a very, across the 22 cut sheets and the 10 priority projects, like that could be a layer that could be compelling. And I'm just curious if you had that data.
The bike network that is input into the Complete Streets Plan comes out of our 2020 Bike Master Plan. And as part of that development, we did look at connectivity to key community destinations. So that's employment, that's schools, that's retail, and parks, because we're so lucky to have so many great parks here. In terms of having specific bike facility types connecting to each park, those specific facility recommendations do come out of the Bike Master Plan. We don't have class 4 separated bike lanes recommended everywhere, because in some cases for the roadway type or volumes it doesn't make sense. In some cases we do need to acknowledge the amount of roadway space that we have, and if we're not able to have class 4 bike lanes and 2 through lanes of travel, it's just perhaps not feasible for that area. So in terms of looking at the connectivity in this plan, it's kind of grandfathered in from when we did that process in the Bike Master Plan. In terms of specific bike facilities, we can look at that in greater detail if you'd like.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I would be curious about just like a percent, Sue Ellen, like not like, too much, but just like, if you can give me a directional sense on email, I would appreciate that. Thank you. And then the second question I had was something in the report about the North Central Complete Street program. So, there's a comment that the Humboldt bike lane, in the presentation in the report, there's a lack of use of the bike lane, which I push back on, and I'm curious if there's any plan to potentially do like a trip count for the Humboldt bike lane to actually provide some data rather than purely anecdotal. Because as I've said in a prior commission meeting, I completely believe that any single resident along Humboldt or in North Central has not seen a biker, and I completely believe that there are many bikers using the bike lane. Both are true at the same time. So just curious if there's any kind of data angle that could help inform and educate the whole city on the Humboldt bike lane.
At this time, we don't have specific bike counts for the Humboldt and Poplar bike facilities planned or scheduled. If that's something that the commission would like us to do, then we can look into identifying funding in order to do that. But at this time, we don't have that identified.
Is there an update that we'll be receiving on the North Central Complete Street Plan but parallel process? Is that on our calendar at some point?
It is not calendared yet. We are just starting the first phase of engagement. I believe that our intent is to do so after we've wrapped up the first phase of engagement. So we can get that on the crystal ball so that you know when that's coming.
Okay, thank you. I'll hold it for comment. That's all my questions.
Can I jump in here real quick? I just want to talk just very briefly about the North Central Bike Lane and remind everybody why it was put in. And I think that's really, really important to bring forth. That was chosen because it had the highest density of collisions in the city. End of story. I mean, it was really material. And whether it's used a lot or not, from my perspective, I would be interested to see what's going on with the collision data now that this bike lane is in, and hopefully it's going down. And I'm just going to leave it at this because I thought this would be the time to just make a comment on that, and then I'm going to pass it over to Commissioner Riddlemeyer.
Unless you're going to materialize with some collision data North Central and Humboldt. I am not able to. Okay. Oh, well. Wishful thinking, right? Actually, there is a problem with cars ignoring the bike lane. And I've biked that lane many times, and there's always more than one car in the bike lane. And I know that that scares off a lot of bicyclists. So I don't know if looking at the collision data will really give it the justice that it deserves, because I was about to say, parking in bike lanes. What can the complete streets do about that? Parking in general. I see that this fits under the number one policy, the safe system policy. One reason that there are some bike and pedestrian collisions is because we have street parking. And it's really hard, you hear a lot of times, oh, the kid just, dashed out between the cars. There were cars that were blocking view, and that's a big part of the system issue. I spent part of the summer in Japan, and street parking is not allowed. And there are a lot of bicyclists and pedestrians. And collisions do happen, but much more rarely, because visibility is really good. I know that there's a state bill that might limit the parking near intersections. I'm not sure, you might have more of an update on that than I do.
I don't have a specific update on the status of that bill, but the policy around limiting parking near intersections, we call it daylighting. It's typically 20 to 40 feet, depending on the speed and roadway characteristics. But that's something that the city can absolutely include as part of that safe system policy. And that has been done in other communities at this level, to say that every time there's a project touching this street, we will daylight each crosswalk by that many feet. And that is absolutely something that could get put into these design guidelines, and we probably would recommend that, but those are the types of details that we do want to be nailing down in this plan process.
All right, yeah, that daylighting intersection is really helpful. And another thing that, I commute a lot to San Francisco, and I take my bike on Caltrain with me and Bart, and then bike from Caltrain to my job. And I've noticed that lately they've gotten really good with traffic lights that really prioritize pedestrians and bicyclists. And I know that we have a few, maybe downtown, El Camino 3rd, where the pedestrian gets the first beep. But I'm wondering if there's more places where we can do that and really make it easier for pedestrians and bicyclists to cross busy intersections, because a lot of them are really difficult. I cross an El Camino on 17th a lot to go get a cup of coffee, and man, I wait a long time. I have to wait both crossing 17th and El Camino, and it's a really long wait, and I still feel unsafe once I even get the pedestrian light. I'm wondering if there's much in there for that.
That would be something that would likely be included in the design standards manual. We flashed over it really quickly, but one of the sections is complete intersections. And historically, we've done a lot of work on the roadway and kind of left the intersection as is. And we recognize that, and that's something that we're doing differently in our current projects, and then that we'll be documenting in terms of standards in the complete streets plan.
Okay. Also, there's some great designs, they're probably in your plan for bicycle turns too. Like, the bicycle lane's usually on the right side of the road, but then if there's a right turn lane, the car doesn't quite know what to do when the bicyclist wants to go straight. And it's confusing for both the driver, and it's terrifying for the bicyclist. So at busy intersections, I'm hoping that in the design plan, you do have a, gradual, the bicycle goes over, and then the car turning can safely turn. I'm really glad to see the systems thinking in your number one policy. I'm a huge fan of that. Education, your number two one included education. I hope that's, education for the kids on how to safely walk and bike, but also for the pedestrians, for the drivers to be aware of what their behavior does for those other modalities. And instead of blaming the kid for darting in between the cars, to really have them look at the systems level more as well. I'm glad to see a policy for funding. That's always one of our biggest problems. We have these great plans. We have the bicycle master plan, we have the pedestrian plan, we have, safe routes to school, but finding the funding is always the problem. So I totally support a policy that will help with that. And hopefully they'll allow some quick builds and things to not have to go through such a long process once it gets planned out before it's implemented. I agree with Commissioner Narita about equity. I didn't see in here. And you talked about community engagement, but also more collaboration with the community as well. I think that's about it for me. Yeah.
Were those your questions or your comments? We're on question time.
Yeah, I think that was questions. Yep. Sorry, it's late.
Okay. I do want to open up a comment on Commissioner Rittemeyer's concern about cars parked in bike lanes. That would irritate me. Now, I will share with you, we have a fabulous service here in the city that does parking enforcement, and they do a very good job. And I would encourage you to call, if you see a car, since you're on Humboldt, is to get that plate and that car number and where it's located. And what happens is, if people get tickets, these cars go away. Because I live across the street from a no parking area. It's pickup, drop off only, and it works. So I will share that it does. You get some tickets out there, the word gets around. So you need feedback from us on policies, draft policies, and the high needs corridors. Do you have a slide over here that summarizes I wrote down 4 policies. Prioritize safety over all modes. Do you have a slide there?
I do. If we're closing questions, do we want to check for public comment first?
Well, actually, I just have a couple of questions.
Oh, understood.
Yeah. Let me just see here. Yeah, actually, the only question I'm going to have is plan policies. What engagement has been done for our businesses? Small, medium, large?
In terms of the Complete Streets Plan, we've not done engagement directly with businesses specifically. We've had a number of community engagement events.
Yeah, I see a lot of community, but I'm not seeing, businesses should also be part of this discussion, no?
We're working with businesses and getting feedback in terms of transportation as part of the citywide TDM ordinance, which is more directly affecting our businesses and the development community, et cetera. We had not included the business community as one of our primary stakeholder targets for this plan.
Right. And let's talk about, TDM is for big developments. Let's talk about the small taco shops and all the restaurants along, let's say, 25th Avenue, which you know. Would they not benefit from participating in this discussion? I mean, it could affect their on-street parking and how their customers get to them.
It's possible. I think in terms of the 10 key projects that we'll be pulling out, those are the projects that have more in terms of potential prioritization, in terms of having potential community impact, et cetera. So if there are areas that are mixed use in nature, then we do have engagement as part of phase 2 and phase 3, where we could do pop-ups that are specifically in areas where there's going to be specific projects. So I think that the business community is not necessarily disincluded, but in terms of getting the larger feedback of what the community wishes to see moving forward, we haven't specifically outreached to that community yet.
Yeah, and I think that might be a good idea, particularly for the smaller businesses that are very dependent on street traffic. That's going to be my only question. Let me back up on engagement too. I was a very strong proponent to get families engaged, and that's his family of all income strata. I don't really care what strata they're in. I just would like to have them in, really. I thought farmers market, I looked at what your engagement, you had what I'll call informal, let's call it the farmers market, and city events such as the July 4th, which I think is great. And that's kind of the informal stuff where you can get quick feedback and kind of what I'm kind of thinking of. But I also like the fact that you also did a formal with the San Mateo Foster City School District. So it's a sit down, it's a more concentrated, focused event. I'm wondering if there's things you could do like that for families. And this would be families all over particularly families located in this map area where we've got the high priorities. I'm thinking, as I was thinking here, St. Gregory's School, it's a church and a school. You would bring together families there. I'm thinking possibly Aragon High School. I was just sitting here trying to think of where could, if we look at your map with the high priority corridors, where could we get families engaged, both in an informal, but also a formal? I liked I like what you did with the San Mateo Foster City School District. Because that's where you can, but it needs to, I think, go to other venues, but I can't quite think of what, the schools come to my mind, that is the schools and churches, that is not exclusively a church, but a church and a school like St. Gregory's, I think isn't very interesting. But I think working on the families is...
Through the chair.
Yeah, please.
On that note, as part of the phase 2 engagement, we're setting up focus groups, have set up, they're already scheduled, focus groups with Baywood Elementary and Sunnybray Elementary. We are working on something either in the Hillsdale or Abbott area, depending on who will be able to host us. But really working through the school districts to reach the families, because that's where they spend a lot of their time. Working with the focus groups are really with the parents. At College Park focus group, the children were there as well. At Baywood, we'll be meeting with the PTA. At Sunnybray, I believe it's with PTA as well.
Right,
so
yeah,
a high
PTA,
number of
yeah.
families that are engaged in the school. But what we did was look at the map and try to geographically distribute where we're doing that engagement in phase 2 based on where we have our high needs corridor.
Right. And like I said, I would get a whole different types. St. Gregory's, I don't know if they're on the high needs corridor. If they're not, then maybe it doesn't make sense. Because I can see the geographic concentration. That makes sense to me. Okay, that's my only my questions.
Through the chair, I'm so sorry. I have one more now that I'm looking at them.
Please.
Could you clarify again on the map of the high need corridors, there's circles with numbers 23 to like 33 or 32? 33. Could you clarify what those mean again? Because those are not in the 22 cut sheets. They didn't make the cut, right? But what is that? Yeah, like there's one around the San Mateo Village, there's one on Sugarloaf.
The ones that have like the white.
Yeah, there's like one in San Mateo Park. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so those are areas where there were very high priority modal projects for their modal plan. So for example, like a very high priority pedestrian project from the TOD pedestrian action plan, for example.
But when you stack them all together, they don't make the cut for like a complete street.
Exactly. So they don't necessarily make the cut when we say like what have all of these competing modal priorities, safety needs, et cetera.
Okay.
But they were identified as a high priority project for that mode, and we didn't want to just throw them out.
And then what happens to those? They just get reverted back to one of the other plans were inputs into the complete street?
They'll be summarized in the plan document as high priority modal projects, kind of pulled out from their respective plans and put in one place for that documentation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are we done with questions? Because otherwise I'll see if there's any public comment. Then we have obviously no in person. So anybody virtual out there?
No one virtual.
Okay, so it's all us. Okay. Well, all right. Commissioner, all right, I'm going to bring it back. Final questions, and then we're going to go to comments. Okay.
I'll probably run into a comment. I'm so tired. It's like just rambling. I can't tell from this high needs map if these are on here. And talking about connecting to parks, one thing that I've always found is really flawed in the city is that whenever I want to bike to the Bay Trail, I end up wanting to put my bike in my car because it's really hard to cross 101. So, but I know that there are a couple pedestrian bridges. I'm wondering if those are here at all. I can't really tell from this map. Are any 101 crossways for safer bike crossing or pedestrian crossing?
Do you mean proposed new ones or
any? I know that there's like one or two bridges already, but the lights don't work. I would not send anybody up there.
Yeah, I can orient you on here. For example, dot number 5 up in the North Shoreview area is the eastern part of Monte Diablo coming off of the overcrossing. And then the number 7 includes that it's like half of the bike ped overcrossing at 3rd Avenue.
Okay.
We're also looking at a potential project at that intersection right there of Norfolk and 3rd Avenue. The Hillsdale 101 overcrossing is included on here. And then the Fashion Island 19th Avenue undercrossing is included as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really important to have the crossings safer. And I'll pass it on to comments.
All right. Question? Any final question? I have one other question here. Another one on engagement. So you hear me talk about small business, you hear me talk about family, and I want to talk about the ADA impacted community. Really important. They're silent, but they're out there. And the question is, how do we reach them? And I'll put out a couple of ideas here. There is the Center for, let me back up. The city did an ADA assessment. The question is, who did the city work with to help them in that assessment? I don't know. If there's community groups, the county has got an ADA division, I believe. And there's also a group called the Center for Independence. And I can send you, Sue Ellen, that information. But they're hard to get to, really hard to get to. But if we're looking at this, they need to be in as well. So that's my big 3 on the engagement: the small business, the families, and the ADA impacts.
To that point, the citywide ADA assessment was included as an input into the evaluation here. The gentleman that worked with the city on that assessment is on our external working group. And further, I need to confirm, but I believe that one of our initial stakeholder interviews was with the Paratransit Coordinating Council.
Okay, so we'll do some final comments here. Commissioner Narita?
Great, thank you. So first off, wonderful job so far. Thank you so much. The community engagement articulated in the report was really impressive, and I feel like a level up from what we've seen in prior community engagements, which shows we're evolving and learning and growing, and like that's awesome. So really kudos on that front. Absolutely loved it. So I think about the politics of this too. I come from an advocacy background in climate, city level climate solutions. And so, when we do this work, learning from the journey of the Bike Master Plan to actual implementation of specific projects, it can become very political. And so how do we set up this Complete Streets plan to have the kind of, impact we want to have, not just on city staff who are very sophisticated and able to navigate these things skillfully, but also on city council members and on the community at large. And so with that in hand, I have the following comments and feedback. Specifically, I think the policies need to be higher level. I think that they need to be a little bit more aspirational, and I would recommend they include the concepts of health, resilience, and equity explicitly, because how can one be against health, resilience, and equity? They can't, how can one be against the concept of safety, right? So we need, and it may not be, maybe the word is not policy, I don't know what the word is, but like aspirational, top line, mission, vision, goals, whatever you want to call it. But let's be a little bit more communications, like general communications oriented with an eye to the general public, knowing that other parts of the audience will benefit from the more detailed policies that you've articulated already, such as the funding, implementation, prioritization, et cetera, et cetera. We're missing right now some level of more general communications. And if that comes later, great, but I just want to name it now. Because when we get to each project by project, we're going to need to be able to call back to these core values or North Stars. You can see I'm using a lot of words because I don't know what you want to call it, but I defer to you on this. So that's on the feedback with regards to the policies themselves. I don't have any concerns about them. They're nesting all these other things is absolutely wonderful, but it's just a little too detailed, I think, as the top line goals. In terms of the high need corridors and the map, this is really cool and impressive, and I completely trust all the methodology that has been put into this. Again, going back though to the politics of the matter, it is a little suspicious that there is an area of the map where there is no modal priority for the neighborhood and no high needs corridor. Now, don't get me wrong, that could be just in fact true based upon data, but based upon politics, given the fact that we have a regional approach to city council now where they each have districts, this is maybe something that needs to be considered, and especially when I'm curious about near-miss collision data in this area. I will name personally from anecdotes, and I did not participate in any of the input sessions, sorry, but I will name that Palm Avenue, basically when you start Palm Avenue at 25th, there's a lot of auto mechanic companies and businesses, and it gets a little treacherous, and then you follow Palm all the way to 17/, is it South? Let me look at my little, South Boulevard. That area is actually pretty treacherous, but it might not be raising to the level of, collisions that you receive, but in terms of near miss and the ability to have to navigate pretty complicated intersections back to back at 17th and South, there's a lot of near miss because I already had 2. And I drive that once or twice a week. So it's not great. And just politically, again, it's a little suspicious that that neighborhood is not articulated in the maps. And then with regards to the cut sheets and the 10 projects and stuff like that, I'll be curious what's decided on that front. But I don't have any further feedback on terms of like the high need corridors. They all seem right on the ones that I know about, but obviously I don't know the whole, like all the dynamics across all of the city. But what I do see, I'm like, yep, it makes sense. I'm also just lastly curious for North Central, going back to the comment I made about, or the question I had about the bike lanes. I don't want to direct staff to do anything that costs money without council approval, or I don't know if that's allowed. I don't really know. I'm a little tired too. But we need something that's more real than everyone's stories. And that is a political thing, as well as just a data and use thing, whether it's collisions, near misses, trips. We need some level of data at some point. Or else I am concerned that when we get to the next hard project that requires the next hard vote of the city council, we will not get it. And so that to me is, the data piece is just one of the steps that I think we need on that front. So thank you.
Commissioner Rothenmeier, final comments.
Final comments. I'll try to not ramble on too much. I would be, as has been said already, I'm hesitant to leave out near misses. Those are really important. And, a lot of people don't walk or bike because it's unsafe. So because they aren't there, they're not being counted. Or because it wasn't a severe or fatal accident, it doesn't show up in red. An accident might be minor to one person, but severe to somebody else. If somebody has an accident that breaks their leg, for some person, they might work at home at their computer and it might not be severe. For another person, it might take away their livelihood. So I think categorizing the data and then basing it just on these red spots from severe and other accidents like that, I think leaves out a little bit of the visionary aspect that we could have here. Prioritizing schools, grocery stores, things that people use every day. And, I live near several schools and I really don't want all those students being driven by car. It's a place where we know that there are going to be a lot of kids, and most of them, not all of them, some of them have to drive. Some of them don't live nearby, but a lot of them do live nearby. Usually when you go grocery shopping, you go to the grocery that's closest to you or nearby. Those are the things where we can really have more of a vision instead of just basing it on the severe collisions and the other things that show up on the map. I would like this to be a little more visionary in that sense, but otherwise I think it's great, and it's good to see the evolution of it over the years. Thank you.
I just have 2 comments here. I want to talk a little bit about the icons up in the upper, whatever they are. It's my left, so I'm assuming it's people's left as well. I think I would, I looked at those icons, and they're visual and they tell a story really quick, but yep. So I'm talking about, yes, the icons in the upper left, which appear to be part of this project, the Complete Streets project. But I think when I looked at it, I thought about automobiles. I would include something of someone in a wheelchair, right? They're part of this plan. I might take out the truck, I think it's somewhat implied, and maybe put a scooter in there. Because I think that's really where we're going. But when I looked at that, it was too vehicle heavy for me. And it starts to, images paint words quickly. So that is, and I liked the tree. I thought that was very good. I really liked that because landscaping is part of this. It's a big part of it. And I know that's something I'm going to be looking for. So that's my first comment. My other comment is, and I want to go back to the businesses, that whatever is done has no impact to their revenue. In fact, should hopefully enhance it. And I want to go back to a story here. We put in bike lanes in San Mateo Drive in front of businesses. And shame on me for not being more proactive on that. After that bike lane went in, I went and I spoke with those businesses. And they felt they got impacted negatively because they lost on-street parking. And I get it. So it's stuff like that that we have to be aware of on the businesses. And those are my comments. Okay. We have one more agenda item. We're going to close this up, unless Sue Ellen, Susie, if you have any questions for us. Okay, all righty. So we're going to conclude. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Sue Ellen. I know it's been a long night. So, but your time is very much appreciated. And I think it's great that we have a transportation planner in our city. Not all cities have this. So thank you very much. Somebody's keeping an eye on all the moving parts. Our final item on tonight's agenda is reports, announcements, meetings of interest. Does anyone have anything they would like to let us talk about, let us know? Oh, Brad, please.
I'll just mention the next two meetings. What we have on the slate is for November 8th, the local roadway safety plan. So continuing on roadway issues. And then December 13th, the quarterly bike ped update, and then Public Works year in review for 2023.
Okay.
And I'd like to also thank Sue Ellen and Susie for their presentations today.
Yep.
So.
Okay, thank you. Our next meeting, as Brad said, it will be November 8th, starting at 8 p.m. And this meeting is adjourned. Good night, everyone. Thank you, Susie.